Welcome to the Sleep Haunt. Tonight, the highway stretches endlessly ahead with 10 true disturbing trucker horror stories, tales whispered from midnight roads, quiet rest stops, and long miles where the night feels heavier than the sky. These aren't sudden frights, but echoes that travel with you, lingering long after the last mile fades. Stay with me until the final story, where each thread pulls into the next, and the last echo reveals what waits on the road at night. If you enjoy nights like this, be sure to subscribe so you never miss what lingers in the dark. And before we begin, share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing where these stories travel. And don't forget, your like helps more than you know. It motivates me to keep bringing you stories that carry you through the night. Story number 1. Mateo kept his hands loose on the wheel, the way years on the interstate taught him to drive. The rig purred along a stretch of high desert, a midnight sea of scrub and stone rolling away beneath a sky dusted with stars. The road ran straight for miles, the speed limit generous, the air cool, the cab dim except for the soft glow of the dash. The CB sat quiet, the GPS green and steady. He liked runs like this: no traffic, no weather, just a steady hum and the occasional pinprick of a distant tail light. Around mile marker 244, the radio cracked to life with a snap like a match. A voice seeped in under a veil of static, low and calm. "Westbound, check your 6. Mateo glanced at the CB, then the mirrors. Nothing but his own box trailer sliding like a silver shape in the dark. He clicked the mic and asked for a repeat. No reply. The channel faded back to hush. No big deal. Strange calls wandered in at night, conversations bouncing farther than they should on cool air. He took a sip of coffee and settled in. A moth tapped the windshield, left a tiny pale smear of dust. The road rose gently, dipped again, and the voice returned. "Scale house lit. You won't see it until you're in it." It was the same voice, flat, unhurried, like a weather report delivered in a whisper. Mateo checked his atlas out of habit. The old state-scale house in this county had been marked closed for years. He'd blown past the boarded-up building many times by daylight, weeds curling against the concrete, windows clouded with dust. "Copy?" he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Who's on that scale house?" The CB answered with a soft sigh and a hiss, like the radio itself was thinking. Mateo thumbed the squelch, rolled it back and forth. The voice didn't return. He drove on, the night pressing comfortably at the glass. Another mile, another. The lines rolled under, white, 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 each one a heartbeat. Out of the darkness on the right, a rectangle of light unfolded, like a curtain being tugged open. Mateo felt his breath catch. There it was, just ahead, the scale house, lit as if it had never been closed. Sodium lamps drenched the lot in a rusty glow. A green sign blinked. "Open. Way in lane." He slowed, feeling the rig's weight lean forward a little, and glanced around. The highway itself looked empty. No other trucks, no troopers, no reason for a prank. Still, the rules were the rules. A lit scale that said "open" was like a hand politely held up. You stopped. He eased into the lane, the tires thudding over ridges of old concrete. The building looked the same as he remembered, but restored. The windows were clear. He could see into the office through the glass desks, a bulletin board, a clock on the wall. A long digital readout hung over the lane, blank, except for a small blinking amber dot. Mateo set the brake, flipped his dome light, and reached for his permit book. A clipped, official voice crackled over a speaker near his window. "Pull forward. Stop on the pad." He did. The digital readout flickered. Numbers rolled up, like an old odometer counting. His total weight settled, the number a few hundred higher than he expected, but within legal range. Before he could worry it, the voice said, "Step inside, driver." That wasn't customary for a closed county station brought back to life. But the tone didn't sound stern. It sounded like something between an instruction and a welcome. He shut off the engine, felt the sudden quiet of the night fold in and around the cab, then climbed down with his folder under his arm. Gravel crunched. The air smelled cool and clean, with a thin note of hot wiring, like a toaster after a long run. Inside, the office was bright. The floor tiles squeaked under his boots. There were posters about axle spacing, a list of maximums by state, and a bulletin about a charity car wash long past. An older man in a blue shirt sat behind the counter, though sat didn't seem right. He could have been poised, waiting for Mateo to step into the scene. His name tag was turned a little sideways. The clock over his shoulder read 12:07. "You're heavy on the trailer," the man said, though his eyes trailed over the permit book instead of looking at the scale readout. "Where you headed?" "Flagstaff by morning," Mateo answered. He set the folder on the counter and felt the cold surface seep through the cardboard to his palms. No scent of coffee, no humming from computer towers. A radio on a shelf sat silently, its antenna bent. The man flipped through the book without really reading, then stopped at a blank page. He tapped it, and only then did Mateo see a faint impression, as if someone had written on a sheet above it. He tilted it toward the light. The ghost of letters rose. A date, today's date, smudged by whatever had pressed the page. Underneath, in the negative space of pressure marks, he could make out something that looked like his own last name, but broken, as if a hand had hesitated over it and changed course. "Change out your lane position," the man said. "You'll want your wheels kissing the line. Tighten up." Mateo nodded, though he wasn't sure what was being asked. He glanced left and right. Only the two of them here. The tick-tick of the wall clock loud in the clean light. He cleared his throat. "How long you folks been open again?" The man's face smoothed. Not a smile, not a frown, just a leveling. "We don't close," he said. "Not for you." The words came out like a fact and a riddle at the same time. Mateo slid his book back, thanked him, and stepped outside before his voice could betray his confusion. The lot looked fuzzed and unreal, like looking through heat shimmer, even though the air was cool. He climbed back into the cab, started the engine. The RPM needle lifted and settled. He took a breath. The night stretched ahead, stubbornly unchanged. Same desert, same flat line. He checked the clock on the dash. 12:07. He frowned. That wasn't right. It had been 11:49 the last time he looked. He shook his head, chalked it up to a sleepy drift, and rolled out. Back on the interstate, he felt a little lighter. The odd encounter already had a film over it in his mind, like a strange dream that you tell yourself is nothing, and then let go. He set the cruise and watched the road pull him forward. Mile marker 245 slid by. Then 246. He saw the curve of the land ahead. One he liked, where the highway climbed a gentle rise, and the distant horizon seemed to tip toward him. He let his eyes travel the dark line of the guardrail, the occasional reflector catching his headlights. The CB spoke, soft and directed, as if someone had reached into his cab and put their mouth next to the mic. "Westbound. Check your 6. Mateo's hand went to the mirrors without thinking. His trailer filled them. Beyond, only night. He swallowed, dry. "Who is this?" he asked. But his tone was less curious now, more careful. Silence. The road breathed. He passed 247, and then his gaze snagged on something that was not part of his normal mental map of this run. A green sign on the shoulder, lit up just outside the cone of his headlights. "Open," it said. "Weigh-in lane." The exact same sign, the exact same angle, and weeds around the post. "No," he said, not to anyone, just to the windshield and the soft drumming of the tires. He'd already weighed. The scale house now glowed ahead again, the same amber onion skin light spilling across the concrete. For a moment, it felt like he had drifted off and woken back where he began. He scanned the instrument cluster, the lane, the faint glimmer of his own reflection in the glass. He glanced at the clock. Chardonnay Tiefan. He pulled his foot off the accelerator. The rig slowed a little, the engine braking whispering. An explanation lined up like polite options in his head. He'd taken a loop without realizing. The highway detoured him around a way he'd never noticed. He had mistaken one old station for another, except he knew this stretched the way he knew his own truck keys weighed on his ring, and the clock felt like an image pinned in place. He didn't pull in this time. He rolled past, eyes fixed hard on the lane. As he passed the driveway, he glanced over, involuntarily. Through the window, he saw the desk, the bulletin board, the man seated with his hands poised over the counter. The angle of his head was slightly different this time, like a photograph taken half a second later than the first. He kept going. The station receded in the mirrors, then vanished into the general darkness. The hum returned to the sweeter note of a long run. He waited for 248. It came, at the exact distance it should. He let his shoulders drop a fraction. He looked at the dash clock, refusing and needing at once to know. 12:07. In the second lane outside his passenger window, wind rifled a thin strip of plastic caught on a sign. It fluttered and flapped, and then, absurdly, it lay perfectly still. No breeze hit the cab. No weight shifted in the air. The world had the brittle stillness of an old photograph. He drove. He kept driving. He counted the cat's eyes, reflectors. 1, 2, 3. Then a gap where one had been knocked loose. Then the sharp pop of the next pair. 249 went by. His GPS blinked. The map didn't update. The little triangle that represented him hung in place, a few pixels trembling as if anxious to move and being told to hold. When he tapped the screen, it froze outright, as if embarrassed. He turned the GPS off, then on, the process more ritual than hope. The screen flashed, showed him a loading logo, and went dark. He reached for the CB mic and hesitated. Static droned. It sounded like the hush in a shell held to the ear. He passed the sign again. Open. Way in lane. The light fell at the same angle. The curb had the same dark scrapes. He swallowed. He could feel his heartbeat now, strong and deliberate, not fast but heavy. He noticed, in the way a driver notices the tiny changes in his truck without thinking, that the steering felt a touch stiffer. He flexed his hands and blew air out in a thin stream to loosen himself. This time he did not look into the window as he went by. He kept his eyes forward, the way you do when something on the periphery might become more real. If you give it the courtesy of your attention. The rig rumbled along. The night remained a steady blanket. He tried a different trick, an old one from long runs when the mind got too misty. He spoke out loud to the cab. He talked about the delivery, about the turnoff ahead for a county road where he liked the view of the valley, about the brand of fuel he'd need to top off with at the next truck stop that had decent coffee. He reached over and turned the radio to a music station. A song came in like a faded postcard, a tune from the 90s, sentimental, with a chorus he hadn't heard in years. He let it play. Grateful. Mid-chorus, the music pinched down into a single whistle tone and died. The CB filled that space. Westbound. Lane position. Tighten up. The voice had the same careful, almost kindly cadence. He looked at the dash clock. 12:07. A thought came to him, clear and unwelcome. The station wasn't asking him to stop. The station was checking whether he could be made to, whether routine would hold him like riverbanks hold a current, whether an open sign was all it took. He made a choice, sharp and clean. He turned the radio off. He turned the CB down until its light was a simple orange dot with no sound. He even turned the dash screen dimmer until the cab was nearly dark. The road unfurled in a cone of pale light ahead, and beyond it, only the wide, quiet dark. He cracked the window an inch, and the air that came in was cool, with a flavor of mineral and sage. He took his right hand off the wheel, held it near his face, felt the tiniest tremor in his fingers, and stilled it by rubbing thumb to forefinger. He drove through the next appearance of the sign, through the next and the next. He settled himself into the unglamorous patience of trucking, the patience that tells you the only way to reach the morning is to keep moving, steady as breath. The clock stayed where it was for a long time, like a stubborn child refusing to be led. His eyes stayed where they needed to be, on the lane, scanning, mapping the night. Somewhere between 1 mile marker and the next, a pale shape flickered ahead, then resolved into a tarpaulin draped across a fence, snapping as the wind found it. The sound was sharp, a flag's crack. The hair at the nape of his neck prickled. He changed lanes, gave it a little space, rolled on. The station finally did not appear. The curve he loved climbed at last. The horizon tipped delicately toward him. The minute hand on his dash clock moved, stuttered, then flinched forward to 12:08. He laughed, a quick, honest sound, and then felt foolish for it and relieved all at once. He didn't take his foot off the pedal, didn't celebrate. He simply let the road come. 20 minutes later, by the newly willing clock, a truck stop's neon rose like a low, foggy sunrise on the right. He signaled, eased off, and parked at the far end where the lights made soft pools instead of hard glare. He cut the engine and sat with the ticking metal cooling around him. The world took a long breath. The smell of diesel and hot rubber drifted in waves. When he stepped down, the ground felt gentle under his boots, like stepping into a familiar kitchen after a long day. He went inside, bought a coffee he didn't need, and stood by the window that looked out on the lot. Other drivers drifted in and out, shoulders hunched, voices quiet, those accustomed to the hour. He considered asking if anyone had heard a scale house open in this county, any chatter on their radios. He said nothing. He drank and watched. Sun edged a suggestion against the far black of the sky, the barest light of morning considering the world. He walked back out, the cup warming his palm. On the passenger seat, he found his permit book slightly ajar, as if he had left it in a hurry. He could have sworn he had closed it and stowed it properly, but fatigue makes liars of certainties. He slid into the seat, pulled the book onto his lap, and flipped it open. Halfway through, on that blank page, the faint impression he'd seen under the scale office lighting was clearer. Spots of the page had picked up a hint of oil or dirt from air in the truck stop, and the pressed letters accepted it like they had been waiting. The date was there, a shadow date, not ink, its shape left by pressure. Below it, there was indeed a last name, his or close to it. The mismatched curve of the T, the lazy O, the strong diagonal of the Z, all the small betrayals of a hand he knew. The signature didn't exist, and it did, like a footstep you only see when the dew makes it known. He closed the book. He thought about turning around in daylight and driving back to where the scale house stood when the night made its rules. Then he thought of the man behind the counter, of the clock that read 12:07, of the open sign that might not mean welcome. He turned north instead, back onto the highway, watching the first silver begin to touch the eastern edge of the world. He made Flagstaff by morning. He delivered. He slept. He woke late afternoon to a light the color of honey and the distant whistle of a train. The strangeness of the night before had softened. On impulse, he asked a local at the dock about the old scale house near the county line. The man grinned and shook his head. "Been closed since before I started shaving," he said. "You know how the state is. They leave the lights till the bulbs burn out. Somebody complains, they take the bulbs. But nobody fools with it much. Not worth it. Not out there." Mateo nodded. He went back to his truck. He opened his permit book once more before stowing it for good. The page looked blank. He pressed his thumb very lightly across it, and for a second the thin dirt of the day took hold of a shape below his skin, and the name came into focus under the pad of his finger. And then it faded again. Months later, on a different run, he met a driver at a diner in a town whose name he would never bother to remember. Their talk warmed easily, the way drivers' conversations often did, moving from lane closures to the best time to hit certain cities to the rumor of a back road that shaved an hour off a route. Without thinking too much about it, Mateo asked if he had ever weighed at a reopened station out by 244. The man stirred his coffee, grimaced, and said, "You mean the one that calls for you?" He said it like saying, "The one with the blue awning," like it was a feature. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The radio in the corner of the diner tuned itself to a traffic report, and his voice fell under it, and the world moved gently on. On the way out, Mateo passed a bulletin board near the door. Tacked among postcards and business cards and a paper about a missing cat was a faded photo of an old scale house office. The clock on the wall in the photo read 12:07. The highway has its tides. Sometimes, if a driver hits a low, silent back current, it will bring him past the same piece of shoreline again and again, until he learns how to ride through it with the engine steady, and his attention even. Sometimes, the rules are a test. A sign that says open. A voice that says stop. An old habit that says comply. Mateo learned that night how to keep his lane gently kissed to the line, how to respect an instruction without letting it move his hands, how to let the night's perfumed hush wash over the cab without letting it carry him somewhere he didn't want to go. And if he ever did see a light blossom in the corner of his eye and a building step out of the dark where it shouldn't be, he did not look. He moved forward into morning, where the clock on the dash counted willingly, and the radio was only what it was, A tool and a companion, not a call. Story number 2. Lena liked the night runs over the spine of the range. The road grew honest in the dark, all the distractions peeled away, and the world narrowed to what her headlights could hold. 2 pale lanes, a center line steady as a heartbeat, and the steady pull of grade under the tires. She was hauling produce toward the coast, the reefer a soft hum behind her, cold air doing its work while she climbed through spruce and rock and wind. Ridgeback Pass sat ahead, a shelf of highway cut into mountain, with a pair of old bores tunneled through the stubborn stone. One bore had been closed for months for reinforcement. The detour was a long loop on a county road that cost an hour and a half, but safety was safety, and Lena had already planned her extra coffee and her later arrival. Signs had warned her for 50 miles. Tunnel closed at night. Use alt route. There would be a changeable message board near mile marker 86, flashing the same. Fog met her before the marker, thick and damp, the kind that beads on mirrors and turns the beam into a pale wall. She turned her wipers on low. The tall pines became ink brush strokes sliding past. The pavement felt a fraction slicker, the way it does when the air is colder than it sounds. The message board appeared through the gray like a stage set sliding into place. Its amber bulbs blinked 3 words that made her sit up and squint. Pilot car ahead. She glanced at her notebook on the seat. The state's closure notice hadn't mentioned escorts. Sometimes, if crews were moving materials, they'd run one-way control behind a pilot. Night exceptions happened if the work demanded it. She rolled off the throttle a hair, shifted her focus into the kind of attention that keeps a big rig in line in a place where shoulders are narrow and mistakes win. A pair of amber strobes showed in the fog, low and sure. A pickup idled on the shoulder with an aero board mounted above its bed. The board blinked a simple pattern. Follow me. The pickup eased forward like it had been waiting for her specifically. No other headlights glowed in the rear view. The road around them was the breathing hush of a sleeping world. Pilot, Lena said on 19. You got one with a reefer wanting the pass westbound. You taking folks through? A voice came back without white noise, even in the fog. Calm, efficient, with the clipped rhythm of someone who said the same instructions a dozen times a night. You're in luck. Stay tucked. Keep you centered. Lights to low. Don't crowd the wall. She dimmed to low beam, flicked her fogs on, and settled in behind the pickup. Its taillights glowed an even red, not too bright. The aero board kept its simple message pulsing. Follow me. The pilot's license plate was spattered with grime. The truck itself was one of those common fleet colors that you don't notice when the sun's up. Everything about it was ordinary in a way that felt reassuring. They rolled into the curve, where the mountain shrugged its shoulder toward the sky. The outside lane dropped away to darkness. Fog pooled there like smoke in a deep bowl. The pilot's line hugged the middle where the paint was fresher. Lena matched it, long mirrors holding the lane edges as if between fingertips. The reefer hummed. The fog pressed close to the glass like curious faces. Ahead, the tunnel mouth rose, black as a closed eye. Flashers bracketed the entry, cones in a neat army. On the right, a barrier stood across the closed bore, a bright striped gate. The open bore's lights flickered in the fog, reflecting off moisture, turning the tunnel glow into a mild golden haze. The pilot spoke again. Steady on. Lane shifts once inside. You'll feel it. Keep your trailer tight to stripe. Lena eased closer. The tunnel swallowed sound. Engines took on a different tone in a bore, a throatier music that filled the cab and resonated in the bones of the wheel. The walls slid by in concrete gray. Signs in the tunnel had the older font, the kind you see on highways that were modern before current modernities. Clearance boards overhead promised 14 foot even. Plenty, but you never grew careless with height on an unfamiliar night. The pilot kept a perfect distance, its brake lights flaring exactly when hers would have, its aero board unwavering. And yet, small things began to line up wrong. The aero board didn't look LED. Its bulbs were little circles, warm like lamps of an earlier time. The cones at the shoulder had a faded, chalky orange that spoke of a decade of sunlight, not a recent deployment. The radio voice didn't use the phrases crews had used with her all her years, no, copy that or hold the line, driver, but older, almost formal words. Steady now, and mind your lane, and you're doing fine. Her rear axle bumped once, a soft rise and fall, like driving over an old seam. The pilot accelerated for 2 breaths, then settled. They passed an emergency bay, where a red phone box hung on the wall. The paint on the box had chipped in a pattern she could have sworn she had seen in a textbook photo of this tunnel from before the renovation. "Pilot, can you call the clearance again?" Lena asked, keeping her voice even, as if this were any routine escort. 13, 6 here. A beat of quiet. The voice came back, a little softer, like it had turned its head to speak aside. At the arch, it was listed 1310. "You'll be fine," it said. "Follow close." She lowered her gaze to the ribbon of lane, felt her shoulders lift and settle. At the arch. That was old language, before the signage changed to consistent feet. A little bell went off in her head. It didn't ring loud, but it rang true. The tunnel bent. The air thinned for a moment, as if a small breeze had found them underground. A row of reflectors along the wall caught her low beams and flashed back. In between, a darker shape broke the pattern for 2 spots, like a place where something once hung and now there was only the memory of bolts. The pilot drifted a foot left, then right to correct. Lena matched it, and that's when she saw, inside her left mirror, the faint ghost of an older centerline, pale and flaking, set half a lane from the one they followed. The present line was clear, the one the crews had painted for the modern alignment. The old ghost line led into the sealed bore. For a second, the fog inside the tunnel took on the shape of a road that no longer existed. A suggestion of where cars once ran 2 by 2, the way the highway had lived before closures. The pilot's arrow board changed its message. The bulbs flicked through their pattern and came back reading, "Keep combing. Run." He met a driver at a diner in a town whose name he would never bother to remember. Their talk warmed easily, the way drivers' conversations often did, moving from lane closures to the best time to hit certain cities to the rumor of a back road that shaved an hour off a route. Without thinking too much about it, Matteo asked if he had ever weighed at a reopened station out by 244. The man stirred his coffee, grimaced, and said, "You mean the one that calls for you?" He said it like saying, "The one with the blue awning," like it was a feature. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The radio in the corner of the diner tuned itself to a traffic report, and his voice fell under it, and the world moved gently on. On the way out, Matteo passed a bulletin board near the door. Tacked among postcards and business cards and a paper about a missing cat was a faded photo of an old-scale house office. The clock on the wall in the photo read 12:7. The highway has its tides. Sometimes, if a driver hits a low, silent backcurrent, it will bring him past the same piece of shoreline again and again, until he learns how to ride through it with the engine steady, and his attention even. Sometimes, the rules are a test. A sign that says open, a voice that says stop, an old habit that says comply. Matteo learned that night how to keep his lane gently kissed to the line, how to respect an instruction without letting it move his hands, how to let the night's perfumed hush wash over the cab without letting it carry him somewhere he didn't want to go. And if he ever did see a light blossom in the corner of his eye and a building step out of the dark where it shouldn't be, he did not look. He moved forward into morning, where the clock on the dash counted willingly, and the radio was only what it was. A tool and a companion, not a call. Story number 2. Lena liked the night runs over the spine of the range. The road grew honest in the dark, all the distractions peeled away, and the world narrowed to what her headlights could hold. 2 pale lanes, a center line steady as a heartbeat, and the steady pull of grade under the tires. She was hauling produce toward the coast, the reefer a soft hum behind her, cold air doing its work while she climbed through spruce and rock and wind. Ridgeback Pass sat ahead, a shelf of highway cut into mountain, with a pair of old bores tunneled through the stubborn stone. One bore had been closed for months for reinforcement. The detour was a long loop on a county road that cost an hour and a half, but safety was safety, and Lena had already planned her extra coffee and her later arrival. Signs had warned her for 50 miles. Tunnel closed at night. Use alt route. There would be a changeable message board near mile marker 86, flashing the same. Fog met her before the marker, thick and damp, the kind that beads on mirrors and turns the beam into a pale wall. She turned her wipers on low. The tall pines became ink brush strokes sliding past. The pavement felt a fraction slicker, the way it does when the air is colder than it sounds. The message board appeared through the gray like a stage set sliding into place. Its amber bulbs blinked 3 words that made her sit up and squint. Pilot car ahead. She glanced at her notebook on the seat. The state's closure notice hadn't mentioned escorts. Sometimes, if crews were moving materials, they'd run one-way control behind a pilot. Night exceptions happened if the work demanded it. She rolled off the throttle a hair, shifted her focus into the kind of attention that keeps a big rig in line in a place where shoulders are narrow and mistakes win. A pair of amber strobes showed in the fog, low and sure. A pickup idled on the shoulder with an aero board mounted above its bed. The board blinked a simple pattern. "Follow me." The pickup eased forward like it had been waiting for her specifically. No other headlights glowed in the rear view. The road around them was the breathing hush of a sleeping world. "Pilot," Lena said on 19. "You got one with a reefer wanting the pass westbound. You taking folks through?" A voice came back without white noise, even in the fog. Calm, efficient, with the clipped rhythm of someone who said the same instructions a dozen times a night. "You're in luck. Stay tucked. Keep you centered. Lights to low. Don't crowd the wall." She dimmed to low beam, flicked her fogs on, and settled in behind the pickup. Its taillights glowed an even red, not too bright. The aero board kept its simple message pulsing. "Follow me." The pilot's license plate was spattered with grime. The truck itself was one of those common fleet colors that you don't notice when the sun's up. Everything about it was ordinary in a way that felt reassuring. They rolled into the curve, where the mountain shrugged its shoulder toward the sky. The outside lane dropped away to darkness. Fog pooled there like smoke in a deep bowl. The pilot's line hugged the middle where the paint was fresher. Lena matched it, long mirrors holding the lane edges as if between fingertips. The reefer hummed. The fog pressed close to the glass like curious faces. Ahead, the tunnel mouth rose, black as a closed eye. Flashers bracketed the entry, cones in a neat army. On the right, a barrier stood across the closed bore, a bright striped gate. The open bore's lights flickered in the fog, reflecting off moisture, turning the tunnel glow into a mild golden haze. The pilot spoke again. "Steady on. Lane shifts once inside. You'll feel it. Keep your trailer tight to stripe." Lena eased closer. The tunnel swallowed sound. Engines took on a different tone in a bore, a throatier music that filled the cab and resonated in the bones of the wheel. The walls slid by in concrete gray. Signs in the tunnel had the older font, the kind you see on highways that were modern before current modernities. Clearance boards overhead promised 14 foot even. Plenty, but you never grew careless with height on an unfamiliar night. The pilot kept a perfect distance, its brake lights flaring exactly when hers would have, its aero board unwavering. And yet, small things began to line up wrong. The aero board didn't look LED. Its bulbs were little circles, warm like lamps of an earlier time. The cones at the shoulder had a faded, chalky orange that spoke of a decade of sunlight, not a recent deployment. The radio voice didn't use the phrases crews had used with her all her years, no "copy that" or "hold the line, driver," but older, almost formal words. "Steady now," and "mind your lane," and "you're doing fine." Her rear axle bumped once, a soft rise and fall, like driving over an old seam. The pilot accelerated for 2 breaths, then settled. They passed an emergency bay, where a red phone box hung on the wall. The paint on the box had chipped in a pattern she could have sworn she had seen in a textbook photo of this tunnel from before the renovation. "Pilot, can you call the clearance again?" Lena asked, keeping her voice even, as if this were any routine escort. 13-6 here. A beat of quiet. The voice came back, a little softer, like it had turned its head to speak aside. At the arch, it was listed 1310. "You'll be fine," it said. "Follow close." She lowered her gaze to the ribbon of lane, felt her shoulders lift and settle. At the arch. That was old language, before the signage changed to consistent feet. A little bell went off in her head. It didn't ring loud, but it rang true. The tunnel bent. The air thinned for a moment, as if a small breeze had found them underground. A row of reflectors along the wall caught her low beams and flashed back. In between, a darker shape broke the pattern for 2 spots, like a place where something once hung and now there was only the memory of bolts. The pilot drifted a foot left, then right to correct. Lena matched it, and that's when she saw, inside her left mirror, the faint ghost of an older centerline, pale and flaking, set half a lane from the one they followed. The present line was clear, the one the crews had painted for the modern alignment. The old ghost line led into the sealed bore. For a second, the fog inside the tunnel took on the shape of a road that no longer existed, a suggestion of where cars once ran 2x2, the way the highway had lived before closures. The pilot's arrow board changed its message. The bulbs flicked through their pattern and came back reading "Keep Combing." Between stations. A tone sounded, soft and official, and then a voice, steady as a park ranger's, spoke. "This is Interstate Advisory KPF 1610. Weather calm. Surface conditions normal. Next port of entry closed until 6 a.m. Detour in effect at exit 208 westbound due to bridge inspection. Commercial traffic divert at 208 to County 7. Rejoin at 205. Repeat. Detour in effect at exit 208 westbound." Calvin frowned without meaning to. Bridge inspection? He hadn't heard a whisper on the CB about that. His route planner hadn't flag-checked it. He rolled his shoulders, reached to tap the phone. No service bars. The night out here was old-fashioned enough to take away the internet and leave him alone with the radio and the road. He told himself he'd judge when he got to the signage. Signs on poles meant more than voices in the air. The advisory continued. Details and repetitions, the kind of thing that runs on a loop. There was something slightly anachronistic about it. The phrasing had an older feel, turnpike here, motor carrier there, as if someone had copied a script from a manual that didn't know about app updates. He was still thinking about that when the voice changed, just a hair. It softened an inch and did a thing that made him swallow. "Westbound tractor pulling a white reefer with a missing cap on the driver's side mirror housing," the voice said. "Matter of fact, as a weather report. You'll want to lighten up ahead of 208. The right lane is rough. Take County 7 at reduced speed. You're fine on clearance with that antenna." Calvin's hand touched the mirror without thinking. Fingertips finding the tiny roughness where a plastic cap had been lost to a wash bay brushed 2 states over. He took his hand away, as if the cap had burned. The CB clicked, someone talking to someone else about a deer at marker 190. The AM station hummed its advisory like a lullaby. The voice repeated the detour in the exact same calm. It didn't say his name. It didn't say anything that couldn't, maybe, be guessed by a sharp-eyed patrol. But it had pointed its light at him, not at the world in general. The cab felt smaller for a breath. He tried 19. "Any westbound hearing a detour at 208, bridge inspection?" A reply came from a voice with road miles in it. "Negative here, driver. Clean through earlier tonight." "You seeing cones?" "Not yet," Calvin said. "Radio advisory at 1610 is pushing a County 7 shortcut." Another voice chimed in, a laugh at the end of it. "They run that old advisory sometimes when weather plays with the air. You get ghost repeats. Last week I heard one say the port of entry was open, and I was parked looking at the dark building. Follow the big green signs, not the little brown ones." "Copy," Calvin said, and let the pause fill with the sound of tires and wind. Out on the horizon, red lights winked in a line, the kind of tall radio masts that stand like needles planted in the earth. In the night they looked like a constellation had come down and walked on stilts. Their beacons blinked in a slow heartbeat. He watched them the way drivers watch anything that pulses in the distance, noting without thinking that their rhythm was almost, but not quite, synchronized. Every third blink, they lined up. Then they drifted off again, like a crowd trying and failing to clap in unison. The highway rolled on. A sign for 210 came and went. He expected to see flashing arrows, a message board, something the orange of caution. The road remained clear, a black band with a silver edge. The advisory on 1610 kept speaking its calm detour. He turned its volume down until it was just a flicker of sound and let the old songs have the speakers again. Fog began as a low-lying thing, the kind that lives in drainage and ponds and climbs the shoulders and fingers. The air felt damp enough to touch. He nudged the wipers on intermittent. The smell through the climate vents shifted to clean dirt, wet fence posts, a distant hint of alfalfa. He checked his mirrors. The trailer lights were a neat row of red coins. The road behind him had the emptiness of late night. No headlights lifting over the crest. No urgent rush. The first sign for 208 arrived. A green board with exit. Only arrows. Calvin eased to the right lane, not committing to anything yet, just positioning to see better. If there was an official detour, there would be a forest of signs. He could roll off if the highway told him to. He could keep straight if it didn't. The radio mast's lights fell into sudden perfect alignment, all of them blinking at once, then going dark at once, then blinking at once, as if some invisible conductor had tapped a baton. It lasted 3 beats. Then they fell out of step again. He felt it the way you feel when a song hits a chord that lands exactly on a memory. The AM voice returned over his music even though he hadn't touched the volume. He checked the knob. It hadn't turned. The music was still there, but the advisory threaded a path through it, clean as a needle through cloth. Westbound with the white reefer, this message is for you. Slow for the ramp. There's loose gravel on the shoulder. We'll guide you through. His skin prickled at the base of his neck. We'll guide you through. There was nobody on the radio who got to call themselves we for him at 2 in the morning. Not dispatch, not dot, not the old voice of the night itself. He breathed out, steady. He gave himself something to do. Check gauges, check mirrors, adjust seat by a ½ inch. Small facts you can hold. The exit gore for 208 appeared ahead, broad and ordinary, the kind of ramp fields and frontage roads are made of. But the signage on its posts had a look that made his appetite retreat a step. The font wasn't the crisp current one. It had more gesture in it, more curve. County 7's shield was an older design, its border thicker, its numbers chunkier, the way you'd see on a postcard from another decade. The arrow on the exit sign was not an arrowhead but a straight line with a chevron, the sort you don't see much anymore. A concrete rest area shelter stood beyond the ramp, the old kind with the round roof and the picnic tables under concrete that held the day's heat into the first hour of night. He hadn't seen one of those since he was a kid in the back seat reading billboards like a game. Follow the ramp, the advisory said, almost kind now. Bridge inspection in progress. Local traffic on County 7. Clearance confirmed. No waiting. Clee. He didn't see cones or barrels. He saw the black top of the ramp curve under the fog and disappear behind a windbreak of trees. He saw nothing that insisted, nothing that forbade. He put his turn signal on to test, to listen to his truck clicking its blink talk in the cabin, to hear normal things doing what they always did when asked. At the last second, he left the turn signal blinking and kept straight. The truck took the decision with a gentle ease. He felt it in his spine, a line of calm. The radio masts in the distance blinked, blinked, blinked in erratic sympathy. The advisory's voice kept talking, but it sounded farther away now, as if he had rolled the window up on someone speaking from a porch. He glanced once into the ramp as it fell behind. For a breath, he saw movement farther down, the slow cross of a car. He could not describe its profile wrong for the cars of tonight, its lights too yellow, its speed the patient speed of a time before this. Then fog filled the ramp's mouth like a hand closing. Mile 205 appeared like any other mile. The road remained itself. Lanes, reflectors, the quiet lay of the land. He turned the AM down until it clicked off. The cab didn't change. The advisory continued without the radio now. A whisper, a suggestion, a well-meaning neighbor speaking through a fence about how things had always been done. He found the next brown traveler's advisory sign and noted with the mild absurdity of the hour that someone had taped an X over it, as if a hand had tried to tell the night what to do and hoped the night would agree. He drove a while in silence, the good kind, the kind that makes you feel like a pencil drawing moving across paper, not an animal being asked to guess. The real detour signage finally showed itself at 197 modern boards, with LED arrows and a road crew truck parked with its strobes painting the fog. They waved him left for a lane shift around a patch of fresh work. It lasted a quarter mile and gave him a sense of proportion again. People in hard hats, reflective vests, coffee on the tailgate of a pickup. The world made of now. He pulled into a rest area farther on and let the truck idle while he walked the short path to the vending machines. The night smelled sweet, a prairie perfume with the hum of insects under it. A man in a janitor's shirt swept the floor under the fluorescents, a radio propped on a portable chair nearby. It was tuned low to AM, A baseball game that had ended hours ago repeating its best innings. The man looked up at Calvin's approach and lifted his chin in hello. "Hey," Calvin said as if asking for change. "You been out here long?" "Years," the man said, cheerful in a tired way. "What you need, driver? You ever get that 1610 advisory at night?" "Sometimes," the man said, not surprised, not bothered. He leaned on his broom. "We had a transmitter for that back when the freeway was young. It used to tell folks what exits had water when the drought got bad, where the port was, snow reports. The box is gone now. Antenna came down 2 summers ago, but on certain nights the sky remembers. You'll get the old tapes. They pick up a shape and run it." "It knew me," Calvin said before he could talk himself out of it. "My mirror cap, my antenna." The janitor nodded as if Calvin had told him he'd found a decent cup of coffee after midnight. "Skip does strange tricks. I've heard stations from states I haven't got cousins in. Heard my wife call me for dinner on a channel that was supposed to be traffic. Hadn't been home in 3 days, neither." His smile was small, not a joke so much as a wish. If the sky is trying to be helpful, it doesn't always understand what year it is. Don't let it put your wheels anywhere funny. Follow the paint. You'll sleep better. Calvin laughed once, softly. It felt like a small coin tossed into a deep fountain. He bought a bottle of water, thanked the man, and walked back out. The truck looked kind in the lot lights, chrome dull with dust, bugs printed like confetti on the bumper. He put his palm on the hood and felt the engine's low animal warmth. Back in the seat, he started to roll the windows up and hesitated. He left one open a half-inch and listened. The night offered him no advisory. The wind made its low voice around the mirrors. Somewhere far away, a train said its name once and fell quiet. He pulled onto the highway and let the lane lines guide him like the edges of a page. The radio masts eventually fell behind, and with them the odd pulse. A straight run ahead held the promise of a small city's glow. A smudge on the horizon that meant fuel, food, voices. He drove to it without hurry. When, an hour later, he passed an old overpass with a bronze plaque original construction date from decades past, he flicked his headlights twice in a nod to whatever had wanted to be helpful. The bronze flashed back. He went by, long after, when the sun leaked into the sky like tea through linen, and the grass lost its silver and took on its true color. He thought about the soft, anachronistic courtesy of that voice on 1610. He didn't want to see it as a trap. He didn't want to think he'd been chased. The word that felt right was invitation, misaddressed. A courteous usher in an empty theater, opening the wrong set of doors, asking him to take a seat for a performance from years ago that had finished before he was born. On other nights, when brown signs hinted at AM advisories, he'd check them out of habit, humming along with their loops. If they ever addressed him again, he let them talk to the wider darkness and kept to his lane. The road had enough rules without adding the polite whisper of old tape. He learned in his quiet way how to tell the difference between a voice that belongs to the present and a voice the sky simply found and liked. Story number 4. June had been watching the storm march in her mirrors since midnight. It came slow across the prairie, a gray wall with its own ideas. The kind of weather that changed the shape of sound. The road went quiet under rain. Her wipers worked a measured beat. She ran light on cargo, a box trailer with nothing delicate inside, and the truck felt nimble, steady under her hands. Out there, the land was wide and patient. Fence lines stitched the fields. Water pooled in the shallow ditches like spilled silver. She liked nights like this most of the time. The world shrank to her headlights' reach, and the cab made its own small country. Soft, dash glow, thermos warming her palm, the hum that lived in the pedals. But hunger makes even favorite nights fray. A rest area had been closed for maintenance. A truck stop had been full to the brim, cones at the entrance, a tired wave from a worker in a poncho. June's stomach had that hollow complaint that never sounds angry, just persevering. She told herself she'd make the next exit after the county line. The county line came and went. The rain thickened like someone had stepped closer to the faucet. A sign ahead flickered through the wet air. A modest rectangle of neon set back from the road at the top of a long off-ramp. The letters strobed on and off in the rain. Lantern, then only lantern for a beat, as if the N were shy. Underneath, a smaller sign glowed open, in a steady red. June didn't remember a diner out here. The last time she'd run this route at night, she would have sworn there was nothing at this exit but a derelict produce stand and an abandoned billboard frame. Still, it was late, and she was tired. Neon in a storm pulls like a harbor light. She eased onto the ramp, slow and careful, the way a driver eases into any unknown. The pavement here felt older, smoother, in a way that comes from being polished by time rather than relaid. Juniper and cottonwood hunkered at the edges, dark fronds heavy with rain. At the top of the ramp, the road turned toward a patch of light. The lantern stood with its broad windows lined in condensation, the kind of place that should have had a bell on the door and coffee cups lined ribbed and thick on a shelf. Next to it, a little fuel island slept under an overhang. The pumps were the square-faced, honest kind she remembered from trips in her father's pickup. They had digital numbers, though, not dials. She parked along the far edge of the lot, under a string of bulbs that cast soft circles on wet pavement. Another truck sat 3 spaces down. Its shape was older, a cab-over silhouette, tidy and upright, with a stripe along the side that looked like it belonged to a company from a decade she couldn't pin. It idled mild, a sound like someone gently clearing their throat. No driver climbed down. No silhouette moved behind the glass. Rain tapped and hissed. Inside, the diner was warm. The smell met her like the best kind of memory. Coffee and something sweet. A hint of cinnamon. A little bacon left in the air from an earlier run of orders. A waitress at the counter glanced up and gave the universal greeting for those hours an upward nod that said, "You're welcome, no fuss." Her name tag read Alma in blue letters that had faded at the edges, as if she'd worn it through many wash cycles. In a corner, a jukebox glowed soft green and blue, humming a tune that could have been playing all day or all year. 2 men in work jackets sat at a table near the window, talking low about studs on winter tires. They spoke like cousins do, finishing each other's sentences before they happened. June slid onto a stool. Alma poured coffee without asking, the cup just appearing under the spout, as if the cup had always been there. "Pie tonight?" Alma asked, voice even, friendly without being bright. "If you've got it," June said, smiling despite the hour. "Whatever's easy." "Apple's good," Alma said. "Crust is still soft. Storm keeps folks in their chairs longer, that's all." The pie came warm with a fork that had a tiny nick at the tine, the sort of detail you only notice when you're very tired or very awake. The coffee tasted exactly the way diner coffee should taste, verified, faithful, without surprise. July storms rattled the windows. The jukebox turned to a song that walked along on a brushed snare, a tune June knew without knowing who had sung it first. At the far table, the 2 men bent over a folded map the color of old straw. They traced a finger along a river line. June wasn't nosy, but the muscle that keeps drivers alive pays attention to any talk of the road. One of the men, hair damp on, his forehead said, "Barlow Bridge is slick as a fish." They took the lights down on the west end for work, and then they didn't get them back up before the sky fell. "If you're heavy, keep to the center, the shoulders soft." "Detour?" the other asked. "Not yet," the first said. "They'll get there if the power stays out. Till then, keep your wits about you." June cleared her throat a little. Alma glanced up, already knowing what the question would be. "Barlow Bridge?" June said. "Westbound." "Why, 10 miles, Alma answered. "You'll hear it before you see it. The rain plays on the metal like a hand on a railing. Keep your trailer square. Don't let the wind shove you to the right where the water is running." It had the sound of advice given too many times to count. June nodded and took a bite of pie to keep from saying anything that would make the moment bigger than it needed to be. She had her notebook in the pocket of her jacket. She didn't take it out. She listened to the kitchen pass window squeak. She listened to the jukebox breath between songs. She let the coffee do the small, good work it does when you want your brain to speak properly to your hands. Across the counter, Alma tore a slip from the register. The paper was the thin kind that rolls like ribbon. She tucked it under a brass clip and slid it toward June with a pen. No signature line, no print of a card. The amount written in a neat hand. The date in the corner June blinked was typed in as 2 digits, a slash, 2 digits, a slash, 2 digits. She smiled at herself. Not everything old was a ghost. Some places used machines that had outlasted trends, that's all. When she stood to go, Alma said, "After the first post on the right." The center line goes a shade off to the left for a few feet. That's where the crews shaved last winter. Don't fight it. Let it bring you back. It was such an odd thing to say that it made perfect sense in her mouth. June thanked her, tucked a couple of bills under the clip, and stepped back into Rain cooled by a wind that had come up since she'd parked. The lot was slick. The lights hung steady. The cabover's taillights glowed faintly like someone had left a key turned one click. June pulled her hood up and climbed in, the familiar hiss and clunk of the driver's door, a comfort. Back on the ramp, the neon blinked lantern again, then wavered to lantern. For a second, the red of the open sign seemed to breathe. Then the off-ramp nosed into the highway, and the world went back to the steady language of white paint and reflectors. She turned the radio low, not for company, but for the way it puts a living thing in the middle of the mechanical. A weatherman talked about cells like a teacher talks about planets. The rain softened for one sweep of the wipers and returned for 3. She passed 9 miles. She passed a billboard frame that held only the ghost of weathered paper and the memory of letters. The road rose gently, then slid down in a sweet curve that her hands had learned from running it 100 times in 100 weathers. Then she heard it, a thin patter like fingers on tin, a shimmer you feel in your teeth before your ears understand. Barlow Bridge ahead. The lights on the east end were lit, low and yellow in the rain. The lights on the west end were not. The far arch was dark. The bridge's guardrails made long parentheses around the lanes. June slowed, signaled though no one was there to see, and set the truck in the center of its space with care. The first post on the right did have something odd about it. A scuff mark at its base, black against the wet. Alma's voice crossed her thoughts without becoming sound. Don't fight it. The center line drifted left a whisper, then right again. And her hands followed instinctively, a soft correction, without the stubbornness that makes little mistakes into big ones. Mid-span, the wind shouldered the trailer a nudge. She held steady. Water ran along the right margin like spilled ribbon. She kept to the dry, the slight crown. The truck crossed the second arch. The west end neared. The dark lights stayed dark. On the far side, a county truck idled in a turnout, its amber strobes flashing on a cycle so slow, it felt like the truck was breathing. A man stood under a hooded jacket, radio to his mouth. He glanced at June as she passed and lifted his hand with 2 fingers up. Go on, you're good. The bridge behind her made the rain music again, as if to show what it was like for anyone who might ask later. The highway returned to itself. Westbound, appreciate the heads up, a voice said on 19, familiar from earlier at the diner. June smiled without pushing the transmit. She let the truck climb out of the river valley and into the wide, open dark. Hours later, with the sky thinking about light, the rain eased to a simple mist that laid itself thin on glass and mirror. June delivered on time. The dock was kind. Fast. Well lit. She slept a few hours in the cab with the curtain drawn. The sound of rain went from constant to occasional, and then to a quiet that felt like the world rearranging itself into day noises. When she woke, she rubbed her eyes and, for reasons that didn't require words, decided to go back the long way to see the exit in daylight. It would be easy to find one long ramp, a diner with a name you don't forget. The ramp stood where the map said it would. The little road at the top led to a patch of gravel that had an old rectangle stamped into the weeds. The way foundations stamp when they are pulled up, and their shape is left in the earth as if it were a footprint. A pair of bolted posts stood where a sign might have hung. They were empty. A cottonwood grew out of a crack in the concrete, where a doorway might have been. The smaller sign's frame sat on its side, as if it had been set down gently and left alone. June parked and killed the engine. The quiet of daytime in an empty place made its own sound, the occasional buzz of a fly, the far murmur of the highway, the hush of grass. A county worker in a pickup pulled in to eat a sandwich in the shade of his open door. June walked over and asked, easy as asking for directions, "This ever been a diner?" He chewed, swallowed, and nodded toward the rectangle. "Lantern Cafe," he said. "Closed years back. Folks still talk about it. Good pie. Saved a lot of drivers from sleeping with an empty stomach. Last big storm before they shut it for good. Alma stayed all night with a lantern in the window. You believe that? That's how they got the name anyhow. Power out for miles. She made coffee on a camp stove. Gave away more than she sold. Place never really recovered after the storm or the new highway alignment. Shame. Alma? June asked. The name fit like a stone in the hand. Alma, he said. She passed not long after the closing. People still bring flowers on her birthday for a while. We keep the verge mowed when we can, so it doesn't look so sad. June thanked him and walked back to the truck. Not because there was anything else to see, but because there was nothing else to see, and yet she felt as if she had seen a lot. In the cab, on the dash where she'd slid the little paper for a bookmark, the receipt Saturday, the ink was fainter than it should have been. The date was there, and not there, imprinted without ink, as if the numbers had pressed the paper without agreeing to stain it. Alma's neat hand still read apple pie and coffee, and under that, in a smaller, almost private script, 3 words, keep to center. She drove on. The highway did what it always does. It carried her. That night and on nights after, when rain began to scribe its tiny writing on the glass and the world shrank to a soft cone of headlight, June would glance, almost without meaning to, toward the place where a diner had kept watch, and sometimes she would think she saw a pale coin of neon in the distance where no building stood. She didn't chase it. She didn't test it. She kept to her lane, to the crown, to the middle when water shone like an invitation near the shoulder. Some lights aren't there to bring you in. Some are there to tell you how to keep going. Story number 5. Rhea took the coastal route to dodge the city. It added miles, but the road breathed better at night there. Low marsh on both sides, a thin causeway that ran like a pencil stroke across water, and wind that smelled like salt and dark grass. The map called it the Refuge Road, a stretch that old-timers said had been a ferry approach before the state laid concrete atop the bones of the past. Signs warned in plain language. Subject to tidal flooding. Road closed. When water overrode. Use turnouts. She read them the way she read all signs softly in her head, letting her hands answer with attention. The night was soft and gray. The cloud ceiling sat low, folding back what stars might have tried to look down. Rhea's rig rolled steady, engine a warm hum in her feet. The dash lights made an island in the cab. On each side of her high beams, still water lay black as polished granite, broken here and there by thin rushes that made their music in the wind. Occasional shorebirds stood on one leg like quiet thoughts, their pale bodies hinting themselves in the edge of her lights. The refuge road had few pull-offs and fewer structures, just the occasional maintenance turnout, a small drawbridge shack with its windows dark, and the old call boxes marked with faded blue. She'd crossed here a handful of times, always at night, always with a feeling like driving through a museum after hours. The guardrails were low, their reflectors set closer together than on the interstate a string of small, patient eyes. She'd kept her reefer tuned and the radio low, not because she wanted company, but because a voice on the air makes a machine feel less alone. The CB had been quiet for an hour. A weather station on AM murmured about pressure and tide tables in a tone that made everything sound like bedtime facts. Her thermos kept the last of its heat. The world was the size of her headlights. That was enough. Halfway across, something shifted. Not in the truck. No shimmy. No unexpected laughter in the wheel. The shift was outside, in the way the night placed things. Up ahead, the reflectors on the right rail took on a faint yellow tint, warmer than the LED white she'd been seeing all night. On the left, for 200 yards or so, the reflectors flickered like candlelight instead of throwing back her beam. It was subtle, the kind of change you could call a trick of moisture. The wipers swept. The light didn't change back. At the same time, a sound slid in under the radio. Not static. Not another station. A horn, low and patient, sounded once as if far out in water, and then faded. It wasn't the high, impatient cry of a car. It was the kind of long note you hear from a vessel that knows where it's going and expects the channel to belong to it. Rhea glanced at the AM dial, then rolled the volume to 0. The horn came once more, a courteous hello from the past, and then was gone. Her GPS map, stripped of data this far out, showed the road as a thin line threaded through blue. The name below it jittered between Refuge Causeway and Old Ferry Road with each breath, as if the device couldn't decide whether to tell history or now. She tapped the screen once and let it think whatever it wanted to think. A brown placard rose out of the dark like a thought surfacing. Historical point next right, Old Ferry Landing. Closed. Rhea didn't know the sign. She would have noticed it on earlier runs. Beside it, A maintenance ramp sloped gently toward a pocket of pavement off the main causeway, a patch about the size of a small parking lot with a low wall. In her beams, the asphalt there looked oddly dry, as if the rain had missed it, as if it shone with its own small idea of weather. The call box just before the ramp woke. The ring was delicate, a bell behind glass. Rhea wasn't the kind of driver who stopped for curiosities, not with water on both sides and a long trailer behind her, but the sound followed her for 50 yards like a question, fading as she passed. She checked her mirrors. Nothing but her trailer lights, red coins in a neat procession. The road ahead bent by degrees, and then straightened, as if nothing had ever changed. "Westbound? You crossing the refuge?" came a voice on 19, soft and light, the kind that lives late. It didn't crackle. It simply arrived. "If you see the landing cutout lit up like a memory, keep your lane." Tide's making jokes. Rhea keyed up. "Copy. I see it. How's it look ahead?" "Dry on the crown. Edges slick. They painted the center fresh last month. Trust it." The voice paused. "Horns carry weird. You might hear one. Not a barge out this time of night. Old tape in the air, is what the bridgeman says." "Appreciate it," she said. As if to answer, a little service truck appeared way out in the gloom, a polite constellation of amber lamps nailed to the night. It sat in the turnoff of a tiny drawbridge up ahead, a relic more than a working lift, the kind that arches gently instead of opening wide. The truck's strobes blinked slow. A figure moved near the shack, adjusting something on a panel. The drawbridge railings gleamed with wet. Rhea slowed to the speed of someone passing a neighbor's open gate. The figure lifted a hand. "2 fingers up, go on, you're good." The strobe light color washed the person's vest. Rhea rolled through, the road surface there changing pitch the way it does when layers of repair overlap. As she eased back to the main run, a spray of small droplets puffed from the right as wind pushed water hard enough to kiss the road's edge. She kept to the center, the freshly painted line a quiet promise under her. Then the mile markers did a small trick. Green boards with white numbers are among the most reliable friends a driver has. They tell the truth every fraction of a mile. She passed mile 7, then 6, then 5, where she expected 4. She checked the odometer. It did what odometers do. She passed another green board that said 5. She frowned, angled her head, and saw, in the sweep of the wipers, that the number's paint had a curve to it, an old font, not quite like the others. The pole seemed older, its base dug deeper in marsh mud. The next marker was right again. 4 went by where 4 should be. She let go of the idea that she had to solve every riddle of sign maintenance tonight. A road arrow showed up on the shoulder. Detour, with a black chevron on orange. It pointed into a low ramp that left the causeway and ran toward the side where the marsh opened up. No other detour signs followed. No cones. No crew. The black chevron warbled in the wet like something seen through heat. Rhea's foot hovered a hair over the brake. Her hand stayed steady. She moved on. The ramp fell behind like a sentence unfinished. The wind rose. The truck leaned a fraction and came back. In her right mirror, water textured by the night's small currents slid along the causeway's edge. It should have looked random, but for a dozen breaths it seemed to make a long, low shape, like bow waves pushed by a shadow hull the size of an old ferry, keeping pace. Her ribcage tightened, and then she breathed the feeling away, the way you learn to breathe away the odd movement of a shadow on a long drive. In the next sweep, it was just water again, being water. Farther along, old paint revealed itself under new paint when the wipers hit just right. A ghost word ferry impressed in the great stripe of white like a photograph exposed twice. It was the sort of thing you'd only see if you were looking for a reason to see it. She answered it by checking her tatch and touching the dash for luck. The horn came once more, so faint this time she could have convinced herself it was only the wind finding a strange passage along the guardrail. A pair of headlights grew slowly in the eastbound lanes on the far side of the median 2 white points, moving no faster than her, made humble by distance and weather. The driver flashed once regular courtesy and then again, as if to say something else. The second flash caught the wet road, and for a half-second made it look like boards, like planks swallowing light. The picture unmade itself at once. She passed with her hand lifted off the wheel as she always did. a greeting no one could see but that made both vehicles part of the same world for the blink of a moment. By the time she crossed the longest straightaway, the amber of a real work sign showed up ahead, its LED letters clear in the mist. Water on Shooter next. 2 miles. Keep centered. A county truck idled half off the road with a worker sitting in the cab's glow, a sandwich in hand, looking like someone who had been out in worse and seen better. He raised his chin as she rolled by. The modernness of that sign put her thoughts back on their rails. She felt the little smile that comes when you remember that the present is good at being the present. At the western end of the refuge, where the causeway rose a little and the marsh gave way to scrub and the promise of gravel driveways, a swing gate stood at an angle across a side cut. Chains looped it. A small, newer brown sign hung there. Ferry closed. The word looked too recent to belong to something that didn't exist anymore. On the opposite side of the road, a concrete pad wore a faint rectangle where a small building once stood. It had the loneliness of a shelf without a book. Rhea let her eyes flick to it and away, then back to her lane. The truck climbed the last rise. The marsh fell behind like a thought you leave in another room. She stopped at a fuel stop a town beyond, one of those low-light places where the coffee stays hot by being made every hour, and the food warmer holds secrets under glass. Inside, a clerk watched rain choose to end. He took her cash for fuel and a pastry and said, "Because people tell drivers what's happening on the road whether they ask or not." "You coming across the refuge?" "They had Tide lick the paint tonight. Bridgeman's out. He says folks keep drifting for the landing like they expect a ramp." Rhea arched an eyebrow. "Landing?" The clerk nodded toward the general direction of the causeway. "Old ferry. My granddad drove onto the last run, told it like a story every Thanksgiving. They left the sign up for a while, finally pulled it when folks wouldn't stop turning in. On nights like this, something about the light makes it look open. Or maybe people are tired and want a place to go that isn't just more road." "Anybody get in trouble?" "Not often," he said. "Mostly just folks tapping the brake and thinking about it. We get calls once in a while on the old line call box rings in the bridge house, and no one's on either end. Sound travels funny on the flats." He slid her receipt over. The date ink bled a little where a drop of rain had found it on her sleeve. Back in the cab, Rhea let the truck idle just long enough to enjoy the way the engine stitched comfort through the floor. A thin sheet of water slid down the windshield and left behind, for only a second, the suggestion of a word traced in clean lines land before the next sweep of the wipers smudged it to nothing. She set the wipers to a slow beat and pulled back onto the highway. On other nights, when she crossed the refuge, she noticed the small signals. If the reflectors warmed to an old yellow for a run of yards, she nodded to them the way you nod to a neighbor you know you won't ever meet. If a horn sounded once in a voice that belonged to tides and paint from years before, she let it be. If the old ferry road made a shape in rain on asphalt, she held her hand steady on the wheel and trusted the fresh center stripe leading her to morning. The road remembers what it was, and sometimes tries to be it again. Rhea learned to answer memory with motion and carry her rig through the narrow places without letting any old invitation turn her where she didn't want to go. Story number 6. Arjun rolled into the industrial park at 2:40 inches the morning, a time when machines spoke louder than people, and the glow from sodium lamps made everything look like an old photograph. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cardboard, diesel, and rain that had been here and gone. The GPS took him down a frontage road past dark warehouses and turned him into a lot lined with chain-link fence. Inside, trailers sat in rows like patient animals. Beyond them, a low, long building wore a lift of loading docks across its side like a mouth with too many teeth. The sign at the gate read Old Creek Distribution Center in letters that had outlasted their original paint. A call box stood near the guardhouse. Its plastic face had been sun-bleached to a pale straw color. Arjun set his brake, rolled the window down, and pressed the button. The speaker breathed once, and then produced a calm, clipped voice. The sort of voice that could have come from any night and any gate. Old Creek receiving it said, "State your company and load." He gave the information, the booking number, the shorthand drivers used to fit a lot into a small space. The voice put his words somewhere and brought back its own. "Proceed to receiving yard. Back into door 47. Chalk wheels. Bring papers to window." He glanced at his dispatch sheet. The delivery appointment matched. The notes didn't name a door. It wasn't unusual for a gate to assign one on arrival. Still, his eyes searched the paper for a second, the way you do when a detail appears that you feel you should have seen all along. The guardhouse lights were on. A man inside lifted a hand 2 fingers up, the universal sign to move along. Arjun nodded more than waved, and eased the truck forward. The yard opened in front of him with its own quiet geometry. Rows of empty slots. A few yard jockeys, nosing trailers where they needed to be. The beep-beep of forklifts bleeding softly out from behind the dock doors. Wind nudged a scrap of pallet wrap along the fence like a ghost of a jellyfish. He was a careful driver, the kind who set up a back before he started it. He took a slow pass down the line of docks to see the lay of things. The numbers above each bay were big and bold, black on white plaques, the sort you can see in rain or Sunday. 31, 33, 35. He counted in odd numbers along the south wall, the way some places numbered for convenience rather than order. At the far end, the series turned even and marched back the other way. 32, 34, 36. He expected to find 47 tucked in that zigzag somewhere. About halfway down, the numbers did something he couldn't quite believe they had done. On the long north wall, every plaque read 47. The font was the same. The screws that held the plaques were the same. The plaques themselves had the same hairline crack at the bottom where plastic gives a little when sun and cold have taken turns. He slowed more, trying to catch a seam or a misplaced digit, a cheap prank, a temporary overlay waiting for daylight. The truck hummed forward. The digits remained steady in their insistence, and the forklift beeps inside the building made a small, steady pulse, like a heart down the corridor. He took a breath and let it out slow. The yard needed solutions, not ghosts. Plenty of places had changed their dock numbering and done a poor job of telling the world. He keyed up on the CB out of habit. Old Creek Yard, driver on the north wall looking for 47. You want that on the north or the south? The radio answered with nothing more than the soft hush of night. He tried again. No one was on 19 here. That wasn't a surprise. Night warehouses lived by handhelds and headsets and the language of beeps and hand signals. He rolled to a stop at the end of the row. The last dock, 47, like all the others, sat with its rubber bumpers clean and its seal in good shape. A sliver of cool air breathed from its edges, the way air does when inside is colder than out. He put the truck in neutral, set the brake, and stepped down into the damp, the lot lights painting him the color of coins. Close up, the numbers didn't get less strange. Each one was a crisp, proud 47. No smudge of old adhesive to suggest a 1 had been pulled off. No halo of a previous digit around it. Just the same number, everywhere. An orange vest moved at the edge of his vision. A yard jockey in a little tractor paused near him, hand on the wheel, eyes curious in the way of someone who knew what the lot looked like most nights. Arjun lifted his chin. 47? He said, not even sure what question he was asking. The yard jockey smiled a little, then considered, as if choosing the right words mattered. Take the one with the cold air, he said. If they told you 47, they'll see you there. Every door says 47, Arjun said. Sometimes, the yard jockey answered, as if that were its own explanation. He tipped his cap in a small, old-fashioned gesture and rolled away to fetch a trailer from a corner of the yard that looked like it collected patience. Arjun walked the line of docks, slow and deliberate. A few details set single doors apart if he let his eyes relax and see instead of reading. At one, a strip of torn caution tape had been folded back on itself like a bright petal. At another, the rubber bumper had a scar, where a tail light had come in closer than it meant to. Halfway down, he came to a dock where the concrete apron bore a faint, wide arc polished by repetition, a sweep that matched the angle he knew he'd take to put a long trailer cleanly to the seal. Cold air escaping from inside made a ribbon of fog where it met the night. The little plume curled, then lifted, then wisped away. He stood in that breath of cold and felt something like a decision settle of its own accord. He set up for the back. Mirrors out, window down, radio off to hear the tires' soft talk against the concrete. He put the trailer in and felt the light bump where the rubber kissed the steel. The red stoplight next to the bay blinked to green with a mild, almost ceremonial pause. He chalked his wheels because the call box had asked for it, and because it's what you do. Inside, the forklift beeps had a 50 beats per minute rhythm, a caretaker's heartbeat inside a sleeping building. In the receiving office, the air smelled like paper and a vending machine that had been restocked a long time ago. A glass window with a pass-through made a stage of a small space. A desk with a neat stack of clipboards, a wall calendar with this month in order, and last month's page torn off not quite cleanly, a hook with lanyards. Behind the glass sat a clerk with reading glasses on a chain. She looked up with a expression somewhere between tired and kind. 47, Arjun said, sliding his bills of lading under the window. That's the one we gave you, the clerk said, as if relieving him of a choice. She stamped the page lightly. The stamp left a clean date and a neat block with received pressed into the paper. You'll hear a horn when you're clear. Your docs, he said. Out there. The clerk's smile made a small journey. On nights when the air's wet and the amps behave the way they want, the numbers do a trick, she said. If someone tells you a door, that's the door. If they don't, pick the one that feels like it's expecting you. It works out. She said it as if she'd learned to keep explanations short. You ever renumber? Arjun asked. Looks like a place that's grown. Twice, she said, looking past him for a second toward a bulletin board with neat old pushpins. Once when the addition went up, once when we split refrigeration from dry. Guards kept telling folks the old numbers for months. People swore they saw both sets at once. Somebody said it was the old adhesives, but the plaques are new. She shrugged one shoulder. Not dismissing, just compartmentalizing. You see a thing in the corner of your eye enough times, might be because it's there. He thanked her and stepped back into the yard. The line of 47 seconds had not changed. A gust moved along the wall and set the plastic plaques tapping a hair against their screws. A polite murmuring like conversations carried out of someone else's living room. He went back to his truck and waited, listening to the soft clack of pallets being set down inside. The beep, the stop, the beep, the go. The red-green dock light sat steady on green. The night kept its shape. When the horn finally sounded a short bleat from a pager inside the office, it came with the dock light returning to red. He pulled his chocks, eased the rig out, and parked to reorganize his paperwork. As he set his binder on the dash, he noticed the stamping again. Received sat there above the dock number in smaller characters than he was used to. The line read, Door 47E. He blinked. He hadn't seen a letter assigned when he was outside. The plaques had only numbers. He walked the length of the wall one more time, out of a curiosity that felt less like a problem and more like courtesy. Past his door, small letters lived in the corners of 4 plaques so faint he'd walked by them before. 40, 7 amperes, 40, 7B, 47C, 47D. At his door, on the smooth white just under the screws, someone had written a lowercase e in pencil, so lightly you would never have seen it if you weren't looking for something to reward you for looking. The graphite line was tidy, the hand careful. The yard jockey from earlier coasted by again, tugging an empty. Get your stamps? He called. 47A, Arjun said. The yard jockey grinned. You landed it, he said, as if Arjun had managed a coin under a glass on a moving table. He tipped his cap again and disappeared into the geometry of trailers and light. On his way out, he stopped at the guardhouse. The man inside had a book open face down on the desk. He closed it with a hand that had done more useful work than page-turning and buzzed the gate. You're released, he said. Arjun signed the log and asked, as if asking about the weather, how long you been telling folks 47? The guard eyed him with the long patience people at gates develop. As long as the box says it, he replied, not bothering to turn toward the old call box. We put in a new phone years ago. Box should have been retired with the last set of docks, but the line runs somewhere nobody can find since the addition. Every time our IT kills it, it comes back with the power after a storm. Folks pull in, get their number, go where they're told. We tried taping over the speaker once. People thought the tape was the sign to talk louder. He huffed a small laugh. Night has its own channels. Back on the public road, the industrial park thinned to the nothing that comes between one set of lights and the next. Arjun drove to the first wide shoulder he trusted, set his brake, and jotted a note on his log to remember the small letter, the cold ribbon of air, the line of identical numbers. He didn't chalk it up to any one thing. He didn't need to. Some places held on to their old habits the way the smell of coffee holds in a diner's curtains for years. A number can be a habit as much as a label. Later that week, miles away and under a different flavor of night, he found himself backing into a door at another facility, one with brand new LED boards above each dock flashing current numbers bright and sure. Even so, as he set his line, he watched how the rubber on that dock had been worn, checked which seal breathed, listened to the rhythm of the beeps inside. He let the place tell him which door expected him. It made the difference between a back that looks good and one that feels good. He liked the feeling kind. Months after, in a different state altogether, he stopped at a diner whose back wall had a developer's blueprint pinned under glass like art. Old Creek sat on that paper, first phase in crisp ink, additions sketched. Along the dock line, in a draftsman's tidy hand, a note had been added years after the fact. Split 40, 7 amperes. B, C, D, add E on expansion. Under it, an even fainter note. Old voice line remains untraced, do not cut. He smiled into his coffee. The world keeps its promises in odd ways. If ever he pulled into a yard and the numbers on the wall matched too perfectly, a repetition like a song stuck on its best line, he let the small practicalities guide him, the breath of cold air, the scuff where hundreds of trailers had kissed the same rubber, the pencil that someone used when something official couldn't keep up. He never got clever with it. He let the night be what it was. A place where work gets done, where little mysteries keep a driver awake just enough, where the right door is sometimes the one that's waiting, no matter what the plaque says. Story number 7. Nora took the night stretch across Kestrel Flats because it was the easiest way to set her morning delivery without wrestling a city at dawn. The plateau went on forever, a sheet of dark grass and shallow scrub, wind talking low through wire fences, sky flattened by cloud. Her tractor's lane-keeping watched the paint and hummed a quiet confidence. Adaptive cruise held steady. The dash glowed a calm constellation. Off to her right, once every few miles, a windmill or lone cottonwood stood like punctuation against the big sentence of night. Her route clipped the edge of a decommissioned airfield the map still named Field 42, though everyone she'd ever met called it the old strip. You'd never know it by day unless you looked hard. The highway was straight, the fences ordinary, a few squat concrete structures half swallowed by weeds. But the legend hung around, the way any place holds its old jobs. The state had paved over pieces of taxiway when they widened the road years ago. Rumor said some of that paint lay under the road. New paint like a palimpsest, a faint handwriting waiting for the right light. At 3:11, the lane-keeping chimed a single note. A small icon blinked amber, then green again. Lane lines acquired. The little status read, as it always did. The wheel gave the slightest nudge as the system settled itself. Fine. She let it help no harm, in a steady hand that wasn't hers kept her own hands there anyway. A half-mile later, it chimed again, more insistent. Lane departure, the screen said, even though the tires were exactly where they should be. The wheel tugged right of its own mind. Nora eased back left, felt the little motor inside the column argue a fraction, then relent. Her eyes tracked the paint in the headlights. The white dashed line was clean. The shoulder rumble sat where it had for 100 miles. Everything real was fine. The screen's ghost of a path wavered, overlaid by the system in a way that made it look like the truck wanted to follow a second road that didn't exist. She tapped the assist off. The wheel relaxed into her hands. The truck felt more like herself again. Out the right window, low posts ran off into dark pasture, reflectors catching her beams 3, 4, 5, then spacing out. For 2 breaths, they looked like a string of approach lights leading away from the highway, vanishing into the weeds. It was the kind of pattern you dismiss as nothing until it shows up twice. The CB, which had been mostly a soft bed of no one, let a voice in not a driver's drawl, not the chop and slang of road chatter, but something clipped and patient. Taxi to Alpha 1, hold short, runway 26. It was crisp as an old instruction. She glanced at the radio, channel 19. She turned the squelch down and up. The voice repeated, hold short. Then the CB went back to being night. Nora hadn't grown up around airplanes, but she knew that language belonged to towers and headsets and reflective vests, not to a 2-lane slab threaded through a sleeping plateau. She told herself it was a hobbyist, a late-night rehearsal from some ham shack or a museum loop carried strange by weather. She kept her hands easy on the wheel and let the miles go under. The headlights fell on paint that shouldn't have been there. Across her lane just for a heartbeat, just long enough to make her foot go gentle on the brake, wide white bars appeared. The kind you see at the threshold of a runway, the piano keys that tell a pilot where earth becomes air. Then they were gone, swallowed by the ordinary asphalt. The system chimed again, as if relieved. Lane lines acquired. Its ghost lanes drifted right, following the vanishing keys into dirt. Her truck kept to the real road and the steady arithmetic of reflectors. She shut off the lane keeping completely, held the button until the message read, "Unavailable, poor road markings." She'd done enough miles to know the only thing poor here was the truck's faith in what it thought it saw. The plateau air held the kind of damp that makes light do a little performance. Cameras love a performance. Ahead, a windsock rose a few feet off the right shoulder, orange once. Now the faded color of apricots left too long in the Sunday. No wind hit the cab. The sock angled as if a breeze found it that didn't find her. It lifted, sighed, fell, as if greeting someone passing low overhead. The hair at Nora's arms lifted like it wanted to be part of the sock's small theater. She flexed her fingers one hand at a time, the way she did when she found herself holding too much of the truck without meaning to. She clicked the AM band over just to have something different speak. A soft voice read out barometric pressure, dew point, visibility at nearby small airports. Kestrel Municipal, winds calm, variable 3 knots. Calm. And yet the windsock had made its little bow. Then, like a record skipping to a memory, the AM hummed into a loop of air traffic practice. Cessna 2, 4, line up and wait, traffic on short final. The signal drifted, thinned, and gave the station back its facts. She turned the volume down to a comfort and drove on. Mile markers counted in their green honesty. The old strip ran roughly from 138 to 134. She'd been told that once by an older driver who liked to talk about how, if you knew where to look, you could see the cut of the old runway in winter. At 136, her headlights pulled the ground into relief in a way that made that lecture make sense. A long, flat plain of gravel beyond the fence, smoother than pasture, while the highway's edge showed scuff and chip the way it always does. Approach lights, if that's what they were, seemed to wink again, this time not in her reflectors but low in the field, a faint chain of pale, pale dots. She didn't chase them with her eyes. She stayed married to the white line like a promise. A shape came out of the dark behind her. No headlights, no engine sound at first, just the suggestion of movement. She watched her mirrors. Paranoia is a reasonable companion at 3 a.m. It resolved into a pickup with its parking lights on, grille an older model, roof rack holding something like a ladder. It kept well back, polite, then blinked once, just a tap of the switch, and let her know it existed. No move to pass, no tailgating. A presence, not a problem. On the radio, as soft as a voice coming from the seat beside her, the tower cadence returned. "Hold short," it said, but gentler now. "Runway in use." It would have been silly to answer, and anyway the radio wasn't the kind you answer with aviation language, so Nora did the next best thing. She spoke aloud to the cab, the way drivers do when they need to say something into a place and have it land. "I'm holding," she said, "on my road." The words felt less foolish than silence. Her headlights threw the highway up toward her, and there, for a breath, 2 parallel tire-polished streaks crossed her lane at a slant, the exact width of landing gear on a small plane. She didn't brake. She didn't need to. It was water doing a magic trick with light. But even knowing the trick, she felt the prickle of the old instinct let the strange pass first. She gave the moment its room, and then it was gone. A sign on the right rose out of the dark, the older brown that means history. Airfield Museum, 2 miles. Golden Wings. She'd seen it before, and never made the time to stop. Tonight it felt less like an invitation, and more like someone at a party finding your eye across the room to say, "We are talking about the same thing, aren't we?" She let it pass. The pickup finally eased left, and came alongside enough for her to see the driver in profile. Cap pulled low, hand at 12 o'clock, eyes forward. He didn't look at her. Didn't nod, just hung there, pacing her, as if unsure what his job was. Then he fell back again, odd courtesy intact. At 134, the world resumed the shape of highway only. Whatever underpaint lay underpaint stayed under. The lane keeping, still off, had nothing to argue about. The dew point numbers on AM rolled dutifully by. The windsock, maybe there was another. Maybe it was the same, hung now like a tired flag. The pickup turned off at the museum exit, its brake lights little red commas. A small gatehouse sat there, dark, a bronze propeller on a pedestal, catching the faintest smears of light. Nora felt a lightness that came when a drama politely ended, without asking for applause. She fueled in a town past the flats, one of those mixed-use stops that was half gas, half coffee, half community bulletin board under glass. The clerk wore a jacket with the museum's winged logo. He was young, his face the kind that belonged either to a volunteer or someone up too late for reasons that had nothing to do with jobs. "You just come off the old strip?" he asked, casual as weather. "Just now," Nora said. Your windsock saluted. He grinned a little sideways. "We get that. Thermal rolls off the road, makes it show off. Cameras in newer rigs get jumpy. They see things we painted before I was alive. On wet nights, the underlines glow a touch. Folks swear the runway keys flash for them. They don't. Not really. But if the paint remembers where it was, who's to say it isn't just being polite?" "Someone on 19 Place Tower," Nora said. "Practicing, maybe. Old loop from the training room. The antenna's not supposed to reach beyond our fence, but the sky lays flat some nights and it goes for a walk." He tore her receipt from the register and slid it across. The paper was warm. "We had a cattle hauler follow the ghost center line into a field years ago," he added. Not for effect, but because the story was part of the place. He stopped before anything dumb. Toe got him at sunup. He said it felt like the road turned and he didn't want to be rude and argue. "What's the trick?" Nora asked, meaning. "What do you tell people when they ask you how not to make a mistake that has its own gravity?" The clerk traced a line on the counter with his finger, straight and steady. "Trust the fresh paint. If your dash draws a road for you that isn't on the ground, cover the camera and use your eyes. If you hear, 'hold short,' take it as a kindness and keep doing what you're doing. The real road doesn't ask permission." Back in her cab, Nora pulled a square of tape from her toolkit and stuck it over the forward camera housing, just to keep the system from trying to interpret what she didn't need interpreted. The dash complained in a small, polite box about limited assistance. She smiled at the wording, as if the truck were apologizing for not being able to watch. "I've got it," she said, fingertip tapping the wheel twice. On her return trip days later, sun just down, heat leaving the pavement in low wriggles, she looked toward the museum as she passed. A volunteer stood by the gate with a folding chair, a dog at his feet, both of them watching cars like a hobby. The windsock lay still as laundry. The field was just a field, yet in her peripheral vision the highway seemed briefly to line up with something wider, older, and very straight. And the notion came to her that places don't forget. They consent to be used differently, and then, when conditions are right, they remind anyone listening of the old choreography. On other nights, if a system chimed in her cab and drew helpful glittering lines where no lanes ran, Nora turned the help off, made her own, as if with pencil and calm hand. If a voice said, "hold short," she answered by making sure her trailer was exactly where it should be and letting something unseen take the right of way in a sky she couldn't see. The flats gave up their mimicry by 134 every time she crossed, and she carried that small courtesy with her. Some invitations are only echoes, some instructions are souvenirs. The road itself, concrete, paint, rumble, reflectors, was the only thing that asked anything real of her, and she answered it mile after mile until morning. Story number 8. Cole ran the County 2 lane that split fields and windbreaks in a near-perfect line, a quiet shortcut the locals called the Meridian. It was a good night for miles. Early autumn cool, the kind of air that smells like cut hay and damp earth if you crack the window, stars laying a thin cloth over the dark. His tanker rode smooth behind him, food-grade ethanol sloshing with the slow patience of a lake in a long, shallow bowl. Placards on the trailer flashed back his own headlights when the road curved. Regulations liked him to be cautious, and he was. He stopped where he should stop, even when the world looked empty. Somewhere between small towns, the Meridian crossed an old branch line, Morrow Crossing, the map said. The rails had been quiet for years, everyone said. The old sugar plant out past the river had shut its doors, and the last freight had taken the siding and not come back. Farm kids took pictures sitting on the rusted railhead at sunset. The crossbuck still stood, white faded to the color of old bones, with a small rectangular sign bolted beneath. Exempt. The way the law worked here, that meant buses and placarded loads could keep rolling without stopping. Company policy asked something else. Cole's dispatcher had underlined it once, in an email he kept starred. If it looks like a crossing, stop and look. So he did. He eased down in gear and let the rig hum itself to a halt before the stop line. He set his four-ways on out of habit, rolled the window open, and listened. Crickets wrote invisible lines in the ditch. Somewhere far off, a dog gave a single opinion and decided it didn't matter. The crossing stayed dark. No red eyes, no dinging bell. He watched the rails with the exaggerated patience of someone who enjoys doing a thing right. The steel threw a cold glimmer under his headlights. No vibration came up through the road. He would have put it back in gear. A smooth forward, if not for the tiny sound from the gray metal cabinet by the right-hand mast. It was nothing, just a click, like a thermostat deciding the room wanted heat. Then another, double-tapped, as if a relay had been roused from a nap. Cole blinked, instinctively turning his ear toward it the way you always do with small mechanical noises in the night. The cabinet clicked again. Somewhere inside it, a transformer began to hum, a soft, low note that you only hear if the rest of the world agrees to be quiet. The crossing awakened in small stages. One red lens winked to life with a shy glow, then its twin on the other mast. They brightened and settled into a slow, alternating pulse left, right, throwing long, rhythmic breath on the blacktop. The bell started late, like a chorus member finding their place, not a shrill clang, but a measured iron tongue. Ding, 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 with the kind of human warm timing old mechanisms have. The gate on the far side creaked, shook rainwater from its arm like a dog shedding, and lowered with the polite insistence of ritual. The gate on his side did the same. The road closed itself as if for company. Cole felt the tiny animal part of his brain tense and then sit. Between a red pulse and the next, he caught the thought that he had not touched any button, had not crossed any sensor. The rails looked like something a museum might sweep once a month. The EXEMPT placard felt, for a breath, less like an instruction and more like a memory. He set the brake fully, kept the rig in neutral, and rested his fingers lightly on the wheel. If a train lived somewhere beyond that darkness, he would have rather looked foolish to the empty fields than wrong to the weight of steel. He listened, ears straining for the particular sound rails make when they carry something before they show it. A whisper that becomes a low, regular thunder. A song that rises from iron to air. Nothing. Only the bell and the wind and the truck's steady, comfortable respiration. He glanced in his mirror. The road behind held only his own four ways, blinking back like a friend keeping rhythm. A breeze moved across the field and made the corn stubble whisper. In the mast light's red wash, something like dust hung motionless, then drifted, as if deciding whether the lights deserved attention. Cole cracked the passenger window enough to smell creosote. That scent shouldn't have been so strong at a crossing that had lived this long without work. A minute wore a hole in itself. Then the air changed, not louder, not a noise you could point at, but a pressure, a subtle set of pins pressing against the eardrum the way a big truck does when it passes, and nobody else sees it yet. The rails in front of him ticked once, the faintest twitch, like the pluck of a wire. A sound came, not carried from the air but up through the road surface, a tremor that lived in the soles of his boots and climbed, careful as ivy, up his bones. It was like a wheel had found a flat spot a long way away and was teaching that flat spot how to talk. His headlights faced a line of tree line and darkness, and in that darkness, a paler darkness seemed to move the suggestion of a face coming near and saying nothing. The red lights drummed. The bell kept time. Something passed the crossing. It was not visible the way headlights are visible, not shaped the way a truck has shape. It traveled with a presence you could count by. Cole found himself counting not out of fear, but because counting makes something that isn't yours into something you can set beside numbers. He counted the beats of the bell and imagined them as axles, as boxcars rolling past. From somewhere he didn't know he had, he fell into the cadence old heads use for yards. 1,000, 2 1,000. The pressure eased between counts and then returned, regular, like a quiet animal crossing a shallow stream. Some part of him giggled inwardly at himself, a grown man counting ghosts like boxcars, but the rest of him stayed where he was and did what he knew how to do. Held the brake, watched the light, listened. In his big head, the imaginary consist was short, then not short, then long enough that he thought of sidings and clearances in the nights when trains did run here. His numbers climbed past 20 and then into the 30s. The red lights blinked, tireless. From the left-hand ditch, an insect rose and wandered lazily through the beam, glowing momentarily like a cinder when it crossed the path of the mast's red. Fireflies lived here sometimes in June. It wasn't June. The night made sense, and then made a new kind of sense on top of the first. He remembered, unhelpfully and exactly, a driver at a diner half a state away telling a story about a crossing that ran on a memory. It's like the old predictor thinks a train's coming and it does what it was taught. The rail is a long antenna. It hears what it wants. At the time, Cole had smiled. The way you smile when stories are a way of being on the road. He found no smile now. He found patience. The pressure let go the way a hand lets go. Fingers first, palm last. The bell slowed and softened, and stopped. The red pulse went steady once, twice, as if to ask if work had been done well, then blinked out. The arm of the gate rose and dripped. The road cleared itself into simple, empty road. The cabinet hummed another second in its corner, and then felt content to stop. Cole breathed in a long line and out in a long line. He did not immediately pull forward. He took one more breath of creosote that wasn't there anymore. Then he reached for the gear and let the weight move. He rolled over the crossing at patient speed, eyes left, eyes right, windows open enough to swallow whatever sound chose to come. The rails under him felt as ordinary as any other rails stitched into asphalt. A brief ping up through the tires. A reminder of what roads share with other roads. Beyond the crossing, the meridian returned to being the meridian, straight, dark, edged with the soft shine of ditch water. He switched off his four-ways and let the night reclaim his taillights. The world rearranged itself into the shape it had had 10 minutes before, and yet his bones carried a new small fact. The crossing had wanted a moment, and he had given it. 5 miles on, a lone car waited at a farm driveway, headlights off, engine a small presence in the field. It wasn't watching him. It wasn't anything but a fact. He passed without it mattering. A radio station came in clean for a stretch. An all-night host, talking about meteor showers and dates when to look up. A meteor found his windshield, ran its bright fingernail this way and that, and burned out over a pasture. At a 24-hour truck stop near the county seat, he fueled and went inside for a cup with a lid that didn't lie. The overnight clerk was the kind who knew drivers' coffee orders as a class of beverages rather than as individuals. He wore a hoodie with a railroad logo across the chest, a coincidence that felt like it had been designed for this hour. "You run the Meridian?" the clerk asked, commenting not on Cole but on the damp on his shoulders and the way certain dust finds a home on a truck and tells the tale. "Just crossed Morrow," Cole said. "Your crossing likes to show off." The clerk snorted softly, a sound with both agreement and affection in it. "Bungalow there still wakes up when the humidity's right," he said. "Old predictor thinks the end of a train is the beginning of a train if the air sets the math in a loop. County keeps saying they'll bag the heads for good. Then somebody in a suit wants to run a special to the elevator 3 towns over, and the railroad man says leave it. Nights like this, folks come in here and swear they stood for a whole freight. One guy said he counted 68 cars. We don't argue. We sell coffee. You ever?" Cole let the question hang, not sure what word should go at the end. "I've walked out there at noon and watched weeds kill themselves on the railheads because they're too polished to hold anything," the clerk said. "At 3 a.m., I've stood at the fence and felt the air change like someone important walked into a room. I don't go around the arms. That's my trick." He slid the receipt over. The date and time printed a little darker than usual, generous with ink. If something wants a minute, let it have its minute. Nothing on that road is worth more than a little patience. Back in the cab, Cole sipped, watching his own face pale in the glass for a second before the dome light went off and made him a silhouette again. He reached without looking and turned his radio down to the lowest notch, the one that admits only weather, and once in a while the voice of a stranger telling a story to no one. He pulled out and back to the Meridian. Near dawn, when the light turned the fields to bruised blue and then to the soft gold that means morning will be gentle. He found himself thinking of the bell's tempo, how it had found its pace without him, how his truck had been a comma in a sentence the crossing needed to write. He took another road the next night, and the next. When he came back weeks later under a different moon and different air, the crossing sat quiet as a photograph, and a raccoon hustled across in front of him with a mouthful of something plundered from a corn crib. He stopped anyway and looked both ways and listened. Nothing. He rolled on feeling like someone who kept a promise no one had made him. After that, when a place asked politely through a light, a click, a rhythm to be observed before being used, Cole obliged. His job was to move things safely from one part of night to another. If some nights included a minute at a closed road with no visible cause, that was part of the work. He didn't need to name it or fix it. He didn't need to figure out whether Steele remembered how to sing when it had no singer. He had time to wait, and the road had time to let him. Story number 9. Avery liked the late stretch when the interstate turned into a long hallway of pines. The road there held itself in a quiet way. No cities, just miles of shoulder reflectors ticking by, occasional overpasses that sounded different under the tires, and the steady companionship of diesel through the floor. The CB sat on its bracket, tuned low. She kept it on out of habit, not for chatter but for those moments when a single sentence from a stranger changed a night. Past midnight, the sky had the color of cool slate. A little ground fog pooled in the low places, the kind that turns the bottom of an overpass into a pale stripe and then lets it go. Avery's trailer was light, her schedule generous. She wasn't in any hurry. She let the cruise hold her pace, and the white dashed line do its steady magic. Around mile 318, the radio crackled with a thread of sound, not the sharp pop of someone keying up close, but that distant, softened quality that means a voice has come farther than it meant to. It was her voice. Eastbound blue tractor with the short antenna. You're heavy on the right side at the drawbridge. A little laugh followed, the way she sometimes released a nervous bit of air without meaning to. Make it gentle. She reached for the mic and then froze. Her hand hovered, fingers not curled, not ready for anything. The voice had not been close. It had been far and quiet, and exactly her timbre, rhythm, the tiny upward lilt at the ends of sentences that crept in when she was trying to sound steady. No one answered the call because it had not been addressed to them. The radio settled back into its small mechanical breath. She checked her mirror out of reflex. Her antenna was short, took a hit from a low limb a week ago, and she hadn't swapped it yet. Somewhere in the back of her head, gears meshed that had nothing to do with trucking. She had not said those words. She had not yet reached any drawbridge. The closest thing, even kin to a drawbridge on this route, sat 10 miles ahead, where a river narrowed into a canal beneath a sharp little truss. Skip, she said out loud, to the cab, to the word drivers use when the sky throws sound to strange places. Old tape. The road didn't change. She didn't change. But now there was a little idea standing quietly in the corner, asking to be watched. 10 minutes later, the canal rose out of the dark. Its truss painted a light that only existed under headlamps. The grade up to it had a short right-hand rise that sometimes tugged heavy trailers into a sway if you muscled the steering. She didn't. She made it gentle. She laughed once, a brief, private sound. Over the metal, the tires sang one note, then another. The sentence from the radio felt like a pebble dropped into a pond far away, whose ripples came back to her just as she reached the same spot. She shook her head once, not to deny it, but to knock loose any stickiness. She had miles yet. At mile 311, the voice came again. Not hers, and exactly hers. Eastbound, it said softly. 2 deer just past the reflector with the missing cap, left shoulder. It was so specific, it made her eyes flick to the asterisk of a reflector she'd noticed days before the one with the plastic gone, so it shone smaller than its neighbors. She lifted her foot and trusted her hands. 30 yards past the odd reflector, 2 pale shapes stood like statues on the left, ears huge, eyes catching her beams like small moons. They did not move. She drifted a foot right, as if they were gravity, and she was a slow satellite. They never broke their watch. She went by, and the night reassembled itself. She raised the mic and, to hear what her voice sounded like after hearing it without her, said, "Appreciate the call, whoever's out there." Silence. Then, Because experiments keep people sane as much as they answer questions, she added, "This is eastbound with a blue cab and a short antenna. If you're me, or you sound like me, tell me what I'm going to say next." She felt foolish, and then felt like the feeling was a thing she could set on the dash and drive around. Nothing came back. The CB glowed its patient orange. She drove. At 303, she heard herself again, a fraction softer, like the suggestion of a voice in a hallway. "Don't take the right lane after the rest area," the voice said. "Gravel spill. Left is clean." The rest area came a mile down, the kind with low lights and a row of vending machines that looked like they remembered quarters. She stayed left as if it had been her own idea, and saw, in the right lane, the glitter of the kind of spill that makes a rig skate, if you're casual. 2 cones stood there like someone had done what they could with what they had. No crew, no strobes, just a little alarm in the road for those who might miss it. She realized then that every call had been about a minute ahead of her. Not an hour, not a day, not the stuff of hard-to-prove campfire stories, just a breath's warning, arriving in her own voice like the future clearing its throat. Her heart did not speed. It changed the angle at which it sat, that was all. "All right," she said to the empty seat beside her, to herself later, to the odd polite mystery. One more. When the highway widened by a lane for a long hill, she keyed up and said in the matter-of-fact tone drivers use when asking for directions, "Westbound at 296? Moving good? Status on the scale?" She wasn't heading for a scale. There wasn't one. She was seeding the air, giving the echo something harmless to catch. A minute later, her voice wandered in from wherever voices waited when they weren't being used. "Closed," she heard herself say, with a short, comfortable laugh at the end. "You're fine." She let the mic fall gently back into its cradle. She didn't need to know the how. She didn't need to press. The road under her required the same things it always required. Patience, attention. A hand that could be soft and decisive in the same second. The night turned a shade quieter, as it sometimes does in that hour before 4. A parcel of fog lay across a low canyon and peeled itself away as she touched it. The pines made their long whisper. Somewhere out there an owl called once, and the call didn't come back, which felt correct. The warning, when it came, did not feel like a kindness. It felt like a request. At 332, her own voice said softly, and then more softly still, as if taking great care, "You'll see triangles. Do not stop." She looked at the odometer and the mile markers and let her face go very still. Her company policy said, "Stop for anyone who looked like they needed help, with whatever caution the situation warranted." Her life said the same. The voice in her cab did not ask for a debate. It offered a sentence like a hand on a sleeve. She thought of all the times she had stopped, and how those stops had been what the job really meant. A strap loaned, a phone shared, a light pointed the right way. She thought, too, of the training videos with their heavy carefulness, of warnings about staged breakdowns, about the oddness of the world when it wanted to pry a door open. She loosened her shoulders and made herself a person who could look cleanly at a scene. Mile 332 appeared, honest and green. Beyond it, on the right shoulder, 3 triangles sat in a proper spacing, or close to proper. They were new and red, and in her lights they should have burned steady. They didn't. The reflective tape was wrong, too crisp in one band, too dim in another, like store-bought props. The disabled truck sat ahead of them off the fog line. No hazards on. No hood up. No visible DOT numbers on the door. The rear doors had a logo that looked like it had been half peeled. The cab's interior light did not show a person moving in that jittering way people do when they're stressed and at work. She eased toward the center line and gave the whole tableau space. As she drew parallel, a door on the far side eased open the width of a hand. That could have been a person looking to speak. That could have been anything else. She didn't stare. She didn't run. She kept the truck moving at a speed that did not insult physics, and did not offer anyone at the shoulder the gift of a stopped, idling engine. On the CB, a different voice knew, wide awake in a way that meant adrenaline or coffee broke in. "Eastbound. Appreciate you keeping it rolling at 332. County's been sweeping that stretch. If you need to stop, go 2 miles to the next ramp. Pull where there's light," she answered, her real-time voice steadier than she felt. "Copy." Looked odd. Been odd, the voice said. Sheriff's around. They like to find the odd before the wrong kind of driver does. She didn't look back. The mirror would show what it wanted to show. She let the truck crest the next small rise and felt her fists release themselves finger by finger from the idea of the triangles. The echo of her own warning in her ear felt not like prediction but like muscle memory delivered early. At the next ramp, she eased off and pulled into a gas station lot, where fresh LEDs made the pavement into a polite classroom. A county cruiser idled with its windows down. A deputy stood by the trash can drinking something that steamed, a posture that said he had been here a while and planned to be here a while longer. You saw it? He said when she stepped down and asked if he had a minute. He didn't wait for her description. We've been dancing with that one. Not trying to scare anybody, just don't like folks being asked for favors in the dark. CB told me not to stop, she said before she could decide if that was a strange thing to say to a deputy. He nodded as if she'd said she followed a detour sign. Whatever keeps your wheels where they belong, he said. We tell people, hazard triangles come with hazard lights. Dot numbers make friends. If something asks you to do a thing the road would not ask you to do, go find a light and a camera and a second opinion. Back on the interstate, the miles resumed their gentle pour. The CB slept. The ground fog decided to be dew instead. At 288, she tried one last experiment, not because she needed to, but because the night felt like the sort of place that welcomed permission. Future me, she said, smiling despite herself. If you're listening, you did the right thing. No answer came. She had not expected one. She preferred the quiet anyway. Weeks later, on a different run across a different piece of night, the radio gave her a single gift. Fog at 219, her own voice said, as if handing her a sweater. It was not a command. It was not a riddle. It was a courtesy. She slowed before she saw the white wall rising from a low creek and let the truck stitch itself through it without asking more of the world than the world wanted to give. She didn't make a study of the phenomenon. She didn't tell it like a trick. On nights when the sky went flat and sound skated across it, she let the CB be a place where time could be forgiving for a minute. If she heard herself from a mile ahead, she accepted the favor and kept her hands gentle on the wheel. If she didn't, she made her own cautions and did what she had always done. Move a big, kind machine through a dark place in a way that made the dark place feel like it had been treated well. Story number 10. Hector eased off the interstate just after 2 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world seems to whisper rather than talk. He was hauling a stack of empty field bins toward a packing house on the far side of an orchard belt, a simple run on paper that gets complicated when fog drops and the local roads turn to thin white threads. The forecast had called for a frost night. He'd heard it on the ag station when he topped off fuel. Advisories for growers to run their wind machines, sprinklers set to throw a protective glaze. He'd seen the fans before tall metal poles with gearboxes and big propellers, spaced like sentries through the groves. When they ran, they moved the air the way a hand moves a curtain, subtle and deep. The county road he took was straight as a promise, flanked by irrigation ditches and rows of bare-limbed trees catching light like iron drawings. Signs went by in the soft wash of his beams, numbers, arrows, names that belonged to farms rather than towns. His GPS had a nervous way of pronouncing them, and sometimes didn't bother. The dispatch note on his seat had the old-style directions scribbled by someone who knew the place. Right on Hollow Creek, left at Hanley, cross the wooden bridge, packing house on the levee. Do not trust the app. The last line read, it gets weird in fog. Fog found him where a low patch of ground collected the cold. It came in a shallow sheet, then rose to his bumper, then his hood. He rolled his window down an inch and got a lungful of damp air that smelled like turned earth and wet canvas. Beyond the frontage road, the first of the wind machines spun up. The sound wasn't loud so much as present. It thrummed out of the trees, a slow propeller beat that reminded him of someone humming to keep a child asleep. Hollow Creek Road arrived as a dark cross that his headlights bleached into something like an overexposed photograph. He turned right, wipers on intermittent, speed set by what he could see rather than the numbers on a sign. On both sides, orchard rows marched into the white, trunks dark, stakes pale like pencils. Sprinklers hissed somewhere under the fog and made their own weather droplets freezing into a crust on low twigs, breath turning to glitter. The air smelled faintly sweet, the way blossoms do even when the blossoms are memory. The CB stayed quiet on 19, a good sign in one way: no wreck, no campaign of cones, but also a reminder he was alone out here except for machines and trees. He kept an eye on the ditch at his right and the painted line on his left. The ditch sat calm and black, a narrow hole the fog respected. The paint on the left edge of the lane sometimes feathered into the white, then sharpened again, as if the fog breathed. Hanley Lane should have been a left after a quarter mile. He saw two lefts, 6 truck lengths apart, both lanes narrow, both with handmade signs on fence posts, both reading Hanley in the same careful stencil. He slowed to a crawl, turned his bright lights off and on, like that would coax a clearer picture out of the air. The first lane had tire tracks polished into its surface by pickups and tractors. The second glistened with a thin sheen of water, where the sprinkler drift had laid itself down and stayed. The wind machine to his left pivoted on its pole and clacked a slow notch, blades whispering. On the shoulder ahead, a dog appeared. It materialized out of white the way a thought does, not all at once, but in parts. First the shape, a low, long outline, then a white patch on its chest, then the pricked ears, and a tail that described a small, tight line. It stood with its body facing the first Hanley, but its head turned back toward him with a look like a question asked politely and without urgency. Something on its collar caught his light and winked once the way a bike reflector does when it wants to be seen but not shouted about. He rolled forward carefully. The dog trotted toward the first lane, then paused and looked back to check if he was watching. When he stopped at the mouth of the lane, the dog stepped onto it, and then off again, nose up, head tilted toward the second lane where the surface shone. It shook itself once, the way dogs do after rain, and his headlights threw water from its coat into a brief fountain. He could see paw prints then, fresh and dark, leading away from the wet lane. The first Hanley's surface wasn't dry so much as sure. The second had the look of a mirror laid where a road should be. He took the first. The dog moved ahead at a trot, always just inside his lights, never fiddly, never spooked by the diesel. It stayed to the right when he needed to keep his trailer swing away from a tree. It hugged the center when the road pinched between a pole and a ditch. Wind machines deep in the trees traded their notes, a low round robin. Sprinklers clicked and hissed. The fog made a small island of the cab. At a bend, something tall loomed on his left. An old smudge pot. One of the orchard heaters from before the fans, a dark metal can with a chimney. Several stood in a row like squat sentinels. Each wore a rime of frost. One bore a fresh scrape on the side, a mark of a recent touch by a tractor or an impatient trailer. He wondered when they'd last been used, imagined the smell they would make if lit, a smoke that would talk to your coat for a week. The dog paused by the smudge pot, as if taking a head count of old friends, then moved on. Hector's dispatch note mentioned a wooden bridge. When it appeared, it did not look like much. A flat deck over a narrow canal. Guardboards scuffed and damp. Frost limbing the edge in a delicate lapidary. He downshifted and let the weight come straight. No sudden corrections, no second guessing. The dog stepped onto the bridge and walked the length of it, turned once halfway to look back at him. He could see the ripple of its breath in his lights, a small, quick cloud. Under the bridge, water moved slow enough to reflect the slightest motion above. On the far side, the fog thinned for a second. A shape took advantage of the pause to exist. A shed with a slanted roof, a stack of pallets, a sign that read Packing House Levee Road with an arrow. The dog waited, tail doing a tight metronome. The sheet of white returned and made the sign a suggestion again. But the direction was in Hector's hand now, in muscle, in small decisions. The levee road took shape without him realizing he had found it. Some roads announce themselves. Others admit you like a hostess letting you into a quiet room. The lane lifted a foot or two, enough to make the ditches lie lower. The fog thinned to a milky wash below and left the top of the levee clean. On his right, in the dip, he could see water sitting where the second Hanley would have been. In his light it made a long, slow rectangle, an echo of the lane that was not the lane. The dog ran ahead then, a little freer, as if an obligation had loosened. It veered toward a break in a fence where a maintenance track cut down to the orchard rows. It paused there, glanced back one last time, and sat, the way dogs do when they give you the floor. At the end of the levee, the packing house rose out of the fog like a ship stealing forward. Aluminum siding, the hum of refrigeration, A yard light with a ring of moths. A gate sat open. A man in a beanie and a reflective vest leaned against a pickup with a steaming cup between his hands. He raised it in a small salute. Hector set his brake where the sign asked him to and stepped down. The air on the levee felt clearer. The fog lay below like a white lake. "You found us," the man said. His voice had the warmth of someone who has been awake a long time without resenting it. "Not everybody does on a frost night." "Two Hanleys," Hector said, half apology, half observation. One was glass. The man nodded like a teacher hearing the right answer. "Sprinklers catch that second lane if the wind tilts. We keep meaning to ditch it deeper. County says next fiscal." He sipped, then peered around Hector toward the levee road. "You come the levee? Good choice." "A dog showed me," Hector said before he could phrase it any other way. The man's eyebrows went up, then down to a smile that was mostly memory. "Black with a white chest? Ears that looked too big for his head? Reflector on the collar," Hector said, feeling faintly ridiculous and not disliking the feeling. The man nodded again. "Pepper," he said. "Ray's dog. Ray was the night watch here before me. Pepper used to make rounds like a foreman. Ray passed a couple years back. Pepper went with him by and by. We still keep a bowl by the shed because it makes the place feel right." "You're not the first to say a dog ran you along the levee on a white night." He didn't make it eerie. He said it the way someone says the frost comes late or the river runs high, a fact with kindness around it. As if to prove the point, by the shed, Hector could see a stainless bowl tucked under a stair with a line of stones around it just enough to keep it from wandering. It was dry. A length of reflective tape dangled from a nail above it, cut into a little diamond like a charm. They got him into a bay and offloaded the bins with a forklift that moved like a careful dancer. The dog did not reappear. When the paperwork was signed, and the forklift beeped a goodbye in the only language it had, Hector climbed back up and sat with his hands on the wheel, the truck idling a low, contented sound. "You headed back through the orchards?" the man asked at his window, as if the question were a courtesy rather than a necessity. "I'll take the long way," Hector said. He meant the state route that ran around the belt and into town where the fog was thinner and the lights were friendly. "Good plan," the man said. "Levee drops into the soup this time of morning." Hector went anyway as far as the wooden bridge, because sometimes a person wants to see a thing again, even if they don't say the reason out loud. The fog held where it had held. The wind machines still turned, their steady hum carrying less weight now that he knew the road to morning. At the bridge, he stopped and rolled the window down. The water under the planks moved with the slow determination of drainage. On the far bank, along the orchard edge, a line of paw prints marked the damp dirt. Not fresh, not old, just there, a set going one way without a set coming back. He crossed, and the fog took him in the way fog does to anything that glows. Hanley's twin mouths materialized. The second lane still wore its mirror. The first looked like a thin ladder, set on the ground. When he reached the county road, the wind machines seemed to sigh, turning a little slower, satisfied with their night. The interstate came back the way an old friend comes into a room familiar, big-shouldered, direct. Hector merged and let the truck settle into the pace that felt like ownership. The orchards fell away behind him, the fan's hum thinning to nothing. He reached for the radio and let the ag station finish telling whoever was listening that the freeze had been light, that the measures taken would see the groves through, that sunrise would be clean. A week later, with a different load and a different sky, he passed the packing house gate by day. The fog was a story everyone could agree on having told. The levee road was nothing but a smart line under a clear Sunday. By the shed, the bowl sat in the shade where it always Saturday. Somebody had set a little tag above it, nothing fancy, punched metal, stamped with a single word. Good boy. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. He took the big road and went where paperwork said to go. On other nights, when weather made shapes out of air and decisions had to be made in cones of light, he remembered the way the dog had kept just in front of his lights, not asking anything, not demanding belief, not even requiring thanks. He thought about how some places have their own night shift, their own rituals, their own guardians that don't mind if you call them stories. He kept his speed honest, trusted the crown, and let the road bring him to whoever waited. Believing that in acres of trees or miles of emptiness, Something or someone often like to step just far enough ahead to show you where not to drown. And so the night settles, and the echoes of these 10 trucker horror stories fade like taillights disappearing into the dark. The road is long, but the stories that ride along with it remind us that silence holds its own weight, and shadows are never far behind. If you stayed until the end, thank you, you've kept me company in the quiet hours. Remember, your like truly motivates me to keep creating more nights like this for you. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. For now, close your eyes, rest easy, and let the rhythm of the road carry you into sleep. Good night.